course, our crew patch there, and I might add, Rich's son, Brandon, who is a 7th grader, was largely responsible for the artwork and the concept for this patch, and we really appreciate his artistic talents and what he contributed to make the mission go. And to me, it's significant or symbolic in the sense that we not only received great support from Johnson Space Center and Kennedy Space Center and everyone that supports the shuttle program, but from our families as well. And I know, speaking for myself, I could not have done my part in this mission without this loving support from my home, my wife and children. So I thank them as well.
The Space Shuttle Atlantis is set to blast off, hopefully with better luck on Thursday, heading for the Russian Mir space station. Crew member Shannon Lucid is scheduled to board Mir, the first American astronaut ever to do that. The Russians are looking forward to it, it seems for rather unorthodox reasons. A top Russian space official says he expects Lucid will brighten Mir during her 5-month stay because, and we're quoting here, "We know that women love to clean." To his credit, he did acknowledge that women can be better workers than men and that gender really doesn't matter, after all, in space. We'll let you know how she makes out.
Atlantis is scheduled to lift off, weather permitting, about 11 hours from now, and we will have live coverage.
This was the evening before launch, and you can see it. We couldn't ask for better weather. Once the winds calmed down on the 21st, the 22nd turned out to be a spectacular night to go fly. With a, albeit an ungodly hour to lift off at 3:13 in the morning.
Shot of the shuttle's reddish liquid fuel tank. You're going to see some white stuff on the outside of that. That is frost. The frost is there because the relative humidity at the launch pad right now is about 80%, and the fuel inside that tank is more than 300 degrees below zero.
On the launch platform to help absorb the shock of the 7 million pounds of thrust. 9. We have a go for engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on the 3rd Shuttle Mir docking flight.
I want you to listen to the sound coming to microphones down there in Florida.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
For those of you who've been there for a launch, you will hear
Maneuver placing Atlantis on the proper heading. Pretty good engine.
It almost sounds like the shuttle rips the atmosphere when it takes off. Listen to that now.
Engines are throttling back now, helping to ease the buildup of aerodynamic loads on the vehicle as Atlantis continues to accelerate rapidly through the dense lower altitudes, traveling now over 650 miles per hour. Time 48 seconds. All systems are performing well.
Next critical point, of course, is
now
go and throttle up at about 72 seconds.
And the engines are throttling back up. Atlantis, go at throttle up. Go at throttle up. All engines are now running at full throttle. All systems are performing well. Altitude is now 62,000 feet. Atlantis is traveling over 1,000 miles per hour.
If you're watching us on the east coast of the United States, you might want to go outside right now. You'll be able to see the shuttle flying almost due north up the United States coast.
To triple its rate of speed over the next 60 seconds. Delivering a combined 6.5 million pounds of thrust, the boosters will burn out and separate at 2 minutes 6 seconds. Time now 1 minute 52 seconds. Solid rocket booster chamber pressure is beginning to tail off, signaling the burnout of the twin boosters.
That's the most critical point to people who watch shuttle launches over and over and over again. The release of those potentially dangerous solid rocket boosters. You can see them now falling back to Earth.
Performance nominal.
That's a good call from the ground, telling the astronauts that everything's working the way it's supposed to be.
Engine tail.
With 3 engines burning at 104% rated thrusts, the boosters have done their job as designed, the main engines as well, and Atlantis can now cross the Atlantic with only 2 engines should one fail. Again, all engines are performing well. Altitude is now 230,000 feet, downrange distance 58 nautical miles. Atlantis is traveling over 3,200 miles per hour.
It's amazing that it can go that fast after being just stopped there on the launch pad. That's going to conclude our live coverage of the launch of Shuttle Atlantis. Thanks for joining us during this mission. We'll be back with you on CNN and CNN International to let you know what's happening as the shuttle approaches the Mir space station and the astronauts join up with the Russians aboard Mir. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on the third Shuttle Mir docking flight.
Roll programming. Roger, roll, Atlantis. Mission Control sees a good maneuver placing Atlantis on the proper heading. Pretty good engine.
Atlantis, rather than Columbia, is on its way to dock with the Russian space station Mir. We got the name wrong. They have bigger problems. There is a leak in part of the steering system. The docking is still to happen as scheduled, and American astronaut Shannon Lucid will begin 5 months on board the Russian space station on Saturday, but there is some question about making this mission a little bit shorter than planned.
Atlantis is now easing through the period of maximum dynamic pressure. Following back up. Atlantis, go at throttle up. Go at throttle up. All engines are now running at full throttle. All systems are performing well. Altitude is now 62,000 feet. Atlantis is traveling over 1,000 miles per hour. Atlantis continues to climb at a relatively steep angle at this point, relying heavily on the solid rocket boosters to triple its rate of speed over the next 60 seconds. Delivering a combined 6.5 million pounds of thrust, the boosters will burn out and separate at 2 minutes 6 seconds. Time now 1 minute 52 seconds.
Atlantis is experiencing a problem that might conceivably shorten the mission, though. Immediately after the nighttime liftoff, fluid began to leaking from one of the shuttle's power steering systems. NASA says Atlantis and the 6 astronauts are in no immediate danger. If Atlantis does dock with Mir as scheduled on Saturday, it'll leave the astronaut Shannon Lucid aboard the Russian space station for a 5-month stay. Lucid to become the 3rd woman to live aboard Mir.
I don't care how many times you sit on top of this thing, these few seconds that you're witnessing here are something that you can never really be fully prepared for. The power of the space shuttle main engines as they throttle up on the pad in those final 6 seconds, and that feeling in your heart, the bottom of your heart, that you know good and well you're going someplace in a hurry here momentarily, is one that will be always part of my memory. I'd never experienced a night launch. As you can see from the liftoff, it's incredibly bright. As we cleared the tower, I watched the tower go by. It was like daytime looking out the left window. And during the later stages of ascent, I got to witness post-solid rocket motor separation here, the experience of seeing out the front window of the orbiter pulsating lights from the main engines in the rear. So you are really kind of in a little glow there, a little lighted glow as you proceed uphill toward main engine cutoff, 8.5 minutes after liftoff.
Okay, and you can see us opening the payload bay doors here, and this is sped up a bit, by the way, so it doesn't take so long in the film. But
die amerikanische NASA hat vor ein paar Jahren einen großen Lauschangriff gestartet in der Hoffnung, Botschaften von außerirdischen Intelligenzen aufzuspüren. Inzwischen weiß man, dass alle diese Aktivitäten keineswegs ein Produkt blühender Fantasien exzentrischer Wissenschaftler sind, sondern einen dramatisch realen Hintergrund haben, und der liegt zudem direkt vor unserer planetarischen Tür, auf dem Mond. Zusammen mit dem Mann im Mond sage ich Tschüss bis morgen, wo immer Sie uns zugeschaut haben.
Normalerweise kommen so meist langweilige Pressetermine, aber der war einfach unwiderstehlich. Eine Sensation, Beweise, dass antike Außerirdische auf dem Mond mal was gebaut haben. Ein kurzer Blick auf den Kalender. Nein, die Einladung hat uns nicht am 1. April erreicht. Und die Pressekonferenz ist auch an einem durchaus seriösen Ort, im Nationalen Presseclub. Dahin treibt es uns, schließlich will man ja auch nichts verpassen. Das ist kein Außerirdischer, aber irgendjemand hat es auf einem NASA-Satellitenbild aus den 60er Jahren angekreuzt, um es zu vergrößern. 2 Kilometer hoch ragt es auf dem Mond in den luftleeren Raum. Ein Denkmal? Jedenfalls ein Beweis, dass vor Jahrtausenden schon mal jemand da war, sagt Richard Hoagland, der berüchtigte Chef der Mars-Mission. So heißt sein Verein. Es scheint so, meint Hoagland, dass genau hier einmal eine komplexe geometrische Struktur, eine Art Glasdom war, mit Luft gefüllt, um das Leben in einer sonst feindlichen Umgebung zu ermöglichen. Auf den offiziellen NASA-Fotos tauchen tatsächlich immer wieder seltsame Dinge auf. The Castle, das Schloss, wird dieses Objekt genannt, das etwa 15 Kilometer über der Mondoberfläche hängt. Ein Rest der Glaskuppel, angeblich. Sie glauben ihm nicht, liebe Kollegen? Bitte schön, noch ein Beweis. Bei der Apollo-12-Mission, das Foto wurde per Computer verbessert, tauchen senkrechte und diagonale Linien auf und etwas, das aussieht wie eine Wolke, das in Wirklichkeit eine feste Struktur sein soll. Denn Jahre später bei Apollo 14 ist das Ding immer noch da und auch die Linien im Himmel ein riesiges, kilometerhohes Fragment, das ein Astronaut fotografierte. Hoppla, der wäre ja dann ein Zeuge, denkt sich der kritische Journalist. Doch auf dem Podium kein einziger Astronaut, nur ehemalige NASA-Ingenieure und Wissenschaftler, die jetzt auf eigene Rechnung forschen. Hoagland wittert eine Verschwörung, denn der große Schritt für die Menschheit wäre nichts, wenn jemand anders vorher da war. Also verdonnerte die Regierung ihre ersten Männer im Mond zum Schweigen und ließ alle Funksprüche mit Hinweisen auf Außerirdisches verschwinden. Die Leute wollen glauben, dass wir was gesehen haben, sagt Buzz Aldrin, aber wir haben wirklich nichts Außerirdisches gesehen. Ich kann mir gut vorstellen, dass Buzz Aldrin in die Kamera guckt und so tut, als wisse er von nichts, weil er Befehle befolgt. Der Präsident sollte diese Verpflichtung aufheben. Wir tappen im Dunkeln. Aber heute Morgen startete die Raumfähre Atlantis. Vielleicht sollte sie mal einen kleinen Umweg über den Mond machen und nachsehen, was da wirklich los ist.
Next morning on flight day 2, after going through the internal airlock and down the tunnel, we got to the hatch for the space hab, and here Ron and I are opening that on our first real morning on orbit, our second day, to get ready to open up the hab and activate it and start operations back there. And this was a very busy place during the mission. As we float into it here, you can see that there was a lot of stowage back here. There's some new soft stowage bags up on the wall, first time they've ever flown. Those were developed for a lot of the equipment that we had to transfer to Mir. You just saw the gyrodyne on the right side, and this panning view shows the bio-rack and the glove box. So between the bio-rack and all the transfer operations back here that went on while we were docked, it was a busy place. And back up on the flight deck, Rick is taking a look at the camera mounted up there. That's our electronic camera for KidSat. We left it in the window during the undocked times. It took digitized images of the Earth and made them available to the students on the ground who were controlling the camera.
This is a view of Florida from KidSat, and I want to emphasize that we really began the rendezvous portion of this mission right from launch, as we launched into a lower catch-up orbit on Mir.
Atlantis is speeding towards a prompt rendezvous despite a leak in its hydraulic system. NASA has decided the problem is not serious enough to cut the short 10-day voyage. Atlantis will drop off supplies, as well as a female U.S. astronaut, Shannon Lucid, who plans a 5-month stay on Mir. And that's all for now. I'm Relita Vasilova. We leave you with more pictures from space. Astronauts aboard the Shuttle Atlantis are ready for their link-up with the Russian space station Mir in about 10 hours. They're delivering supplies, and veteran U.S. astronaut Shannon Lucid, who will stay on board Mir for nearly 5 months.
Astronauts take a giant step into the future of space training. Virtual reality environments give valuable experience before missions ever get off the ground.
Future Watch, brought to you by IBM.
Hello, I'm Donna Kelly. Welcome to Future Watch. Well, here's a space project that's literally out of this world without ever leaving the ground. It's a virtual reality environment that lets astronauts experience the unknown well before liftoff. Kathy Nellis reports the experience can save time and money as multinational crews practice for upcoming missions.
Today's astronauts are experiencing whole new worlds without even leaving home. Astronaut Bernard Harris, a flight surgeon and veteran space traveler, is taking part in virtual reality training, which helped him prepare for his spacewalk last year.
We came into this virtual reality laboratory and actually donned on the helmets, and we practiced every aspect of the spacewalk in order to get a feel of how space was going to be without being there.
Professor Bowen Lofton is director of the University of Houston's Virtual Environment Technology Laboratory, which is jointly operated with NASA. He says virtual reality is ideally suited to preparing for space.
Virtual reality is a computer-generated environment that can lead you to believe that you're somewhere else. It can actually convince you you're doing something else or living somewhere else than you really are right now.
It's like a roller coaster. That makes virtual reality a powerful and valuable tool for space, particularly in training international crews who will one day work together on the space station.
You may have one of those crew members here in Houston, another over in Germany, perhaps, and another over in Japan. Well, by using virtual reality, we can connect all three of those crew members and do what's called distant learning.
Oh.
Yeah, Bernard.
Yeah, can you see me coming to you?
Yeah, sure.
In this link-up, U.S. astronaut Bernard Harris is in Houston, and German astronaut Ulf Merbold is in Darmstadt.
Coming closer to y'all.
This is how the virtual Dr. Harris appears to Merbold.
These two men got into the same virtual world together and were able to effect a satellite repair to demonstrate the possibilities of using this technology as a means of training.
There were a few glitches, including a time lag in video transmission and difficulties with visual cues.
The only thing I don't like is the depth perception. I have no idea how far I am from that.
But overall, Dr. Harris was pleased with the results.
We could be placed in the same environment, though we were thousands of miles apart. And so I could, in my virtual field, grab an object and hand it to him, and he would take the object. It just blows my mind just to think about the applications of this system.
A shared virtual environment helps cut costs and physical wear and tear on the astronauts, who can spend years in training. But it won't completely replace the real thing.
We still think, of course, that final training is going to require physical presence to be able to develop that kind of a one-on-one bond you want between members of a team. But if we can just shorten the time spent here in Houston, we've saved big bucks and probably made our partners much happier with us as well.
One small virtual handshake, one giant helping hand for space exploration. In Houston, Texas, Kathy Nellis, CNN Future Watch.
Got closer and closer to Mir, but we didn't really get the good video, of course, until we got within 1,000 feet or so. This is looking out the ODS center line up at the Mir as we're approaching from underneath. This is the Mir view, what they saw as they were looking down at the Space Shuttle Atlantis passing over the Earth. We included a couple of views of the crew activities on the flight deck. Chile at the aft station flying the vehicle, Rich assisting him, and I was bobbing in and out of the field of view there, working the computers and assisting in my particular role. This is a view of the Mir space station as we passed from across the terminator from sunlit portion of the planet to the backside. And it was very interesting to see that with the running lights, Mir was very visible, and it was quite bright even on the dark side of the planet. Well, as this process continued of the rendezvous and approach up the R-bar, got closer and closer to Mir, and again, this was sped up too, and part of that intent was to make it flow quicker in the movie, but an added side benefit is it makes the commander look even better because it looks like it's really going fast.
John Holloman at CNN Center back with astronaut Jerry Ross on the phone with us from Houston, and the shuttle and the Mir are now less than 10 meters apart, and they are beginning their final approach, which should end in about 5 minutes. Jerry, what is the speed that these two more than 100-ton vehicles are approaching each other right now?
Well, there are requirements that at the moment of docking, the closure rate cannot be any more than 1/10 of a foot per second, plus or minus 0.03 of a foot per second. So it's pretty amazing that you have these two vehicles that are over 100 tons each, traveling at 5 miles a second, 200 miles above the Earth, and they have such precise control capabilities.
I am amazed that this can even be done. How difficult a piloting task is it for Kevin Shelton?
It's a challenging task, but it's something that the crews train for and are prepared to do, and we've demonstrated on the previous docking missions that it's certainly well within the capabilities of the orbiter's control systems.
Yeah. Is there any chance that something could go wrong at this point? I mean, what if the two things, if they started closing faster than the current rate?
Yes, as you know, NASA is always thinking about what could go wrong and what to do if it should happen, and the crews are trained on an entire suite of various different scenarios of things that could go wrong and what they should do if that should happen.
With that,
yeah.
Shelton.
Let's listen to James Hartsfield, the NASA commentator, now for a minute. About 4 minutes away from docking, or 3.5 minutes away from final docking now. Must be a very tense time, not only aboard the shuttle, but also aboard the Mir. Jerry, when you talked to the cosmonauts after you docked with them on your mission, did you detect from them that they were as tense during the docking as the astronauts on the shuttle were?
No, I don't think any of us were really tense. We certainly were very attuned to what we were doing and very much concentrating on that. I think that they were looking out the windows at us, taking pictures of us, waving at us, and I think that they were totally confident in our capability to do the docking as planned.
Right now on the top of our TV screen, we see a black sort of triangular thing. That's one of the fingers that has to interlock with the finger on board the shuttle, right?
Absolutely, that's correct. There's 3 pedals on the orbiter side and 3 more on the Mir side that are clocked, and those two will overlap each other, and that's the way that the last 6 inches or so of the rendezvous are actually guided together.
Yeah, docking about 2.5 minutes away now, if my clock is accurate, and you can see the two ships appear to be maybe 10 feet, maybe a meter, 2 meters apart now, and it's just amazing to watch this happen.
Right, the left side of the screen is a view that shows the 2 mating interfaces. The one on the bottom of the screen is the one that's attached to the orbiter, and the one on the top is the docking module. That's what we put on STS-74. And the view looks like it's actually the station that's coming down to meet the orbiter, but that's quite vice versa. The orbiter is the active flyer. It's the one coming up to meet the space station.
Yeah, and there are targets inside. The picture on the right shows this, it's now green on my screen, a target with 2 number 2s on it and then 4 white dots. What, do you understand what all that means if you're the pilot of the space shuttle?
Yes, that is a target that we left on there. That's the one that we're looking at through a camera that's mounted in the docking mechanism inside the orbiter in an external airlock.
So if we could see that camera, it would be at the bottom of our screen in the left-hand side picture, looking out.
Correct, and it's looking up at the space station, the very end of it there, and you can see that same target there in the open ring on the outside of the Mir station.
Sort of the bright thing inside the ring?
That's correct.
Yeah. All right.
Those bright dots you see on the target are actually bolt heads, I believe.
Oh, yeah, I see one now. It looks like an 8-sided bolt or something.
Right.
Yeah. You guys bolted it in when you were, or it was bolted in before you,
That's
you put
correct.
it up there?
The plate was bolted onto the hatch.
Yeah. It's amazing.
There's actually a standoff cross that's elevated above the surface of the plate, and that's what helps to give you the attitude information.
All that going very smoothly, right on time.
And you can sort of see shadows behind that standoff cross now in this picture.
That's right. There's actually some lights there by the TV camera that help to illuminate that target in darkness.
About a half minute from docking now.
245 statute miles.
Now, just as the shuttle is about to make contact with the Mir station, Kevin Chilton will fire a series of thrusters that will secure and make sure that there's a good capture of the mechanisms.
Yeah. Why does that have to happen? Why, if they don't just, why don't they just lock up when they touch?
Well, under ideal conditions, they probably would, but this is just one final little kick to make sure that things actually will be secured. There's the kick, You can see a good capture, the alignment of the target, and you can see a little bit of vibration on the orbiter camera.
Systems officer reports contact. And a confirmed capture by the docking mechanism.
What happens now, Jerry?
Well, there'll be a series of things. First of all, it'll be a period of time where they'll just let all of the structural vibrations damp out. Then, once that has occurred, and once the relative alignment between the two mating surfaces has realigned itself, then Rich Clifford, one of the mission specialists on board the shuttle, will actually drive the two mechanisms together and then drive a series of hooks that provides the strong structural attachment between the Mir station and the space shuttle.
Calming that before retraction of the docking ring and then the closing of hooks in the mechanism to hard mate the two spacecraft together. In docking right on time for Atlantis. After a very smooth rendezvous.
Jerry, we can see a camera zooming in on the mated spaceships now on the left. Are people on the ground, technicians and scientists, using that as well as electronic data to make sure this is working well?
I think probably they have enough indications through the telemetry that indicate that everything is working well. I think this is more just a visual verification of that and
letting us see it.
Right.
Yeah, it's good. Well, it seems to be going very, very well. Let me ask you this personal question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. Would you, under any circumstances, be willing to live aboard the Russian space station for 142 days?
I don't know, John. That's a tough question. I have asked myself that question and haven't come up with a solid answer yet. I think 90 days would be a comfortable period of time to stay on orbit. Going beyond that becomes much more difficult in my mind.
Yeah, I got a wife and a 2.5-year-old child, and I just can't imagine being away from them for that long. Shannon Lucid has said that, you know, she's made plans. She's already bought Father's Day presents and birthday presents and things like that for her children and husband who aren't going to be able to be with her for that. But it would be quite, and not from a scientific or a technical or, you know, right stuff astronaut point of view, but just from a human being point of view, having to be away from everything you're used to for that period of time.
I think any human being can understand that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're not hearing very much from NASA Select right now, but it looks like everything is going very, very well. And looks like the docking between the Mir and the shuttle, the third one of these, has worked very, very well. Astronaut Jerry Ross, thank you very, very much for taking time to share with us this evening or this morning, depending on where our viewers are watching us. That concludes CNN's coverage of the docking of the Mir and the space shuttle. We'll have more on this mission throughout the evening. There'll be a ceremony where the Russians and Americans hug and swap gifts, and we'll have that for you here as well. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
This has been a CNN Live event.
We're given a panorama of the Mir complex, starting with the docking module here, and now you're looking through the aft cockpit. I'll refer back to the target you just saw. We confirmed after we docked that no flyout was required. Thank you, Melise. But it's a beautiful, this Mir complex is really large, and I have memories of standing back in the ODS, looking up through the tunnel and thinking that it was at least 300 feet up to the Mir complex. Here's a view of the initial hatch opening from the Russian side, of course. And you're going to see a couple happy faces here between Yuri Anaforenko and Kevin Chilton. Tremendous relief once you get there and you join up and realize that it's an excellent place to be. There's some good work going on up there, and felt like home for Shannon already. Neither one of those guys were happy. And of course, Shannon, she felt at home the minute she got there, and they put her right to work. She was one of the experts in the transfer activities, and it's no small part due to the preparation we had here. And here we're getting ready for the welcoming ceremony, one of the official PAO acts. Due to a small miscoordination, we had the flags in the wrong location, so you're going to see Yuri Ustashev bringing the American flag into the docking module base, or not the docking module, but the base block for the welcome ceremony. And then we're going to pass some gifts that we took up to them. What you'll see is some of the personal items that we gave to our Russian crewmates. They both have a love for children and the future of space exploration. So some of the gifts that we gave them were space books for their children. And it brought tears to their eyes. And here you see the gift exchange. Some of the books bought right here at Space Center Houston.
CNN International, this is World News with Cynthia Bowers from the CNN Center.
Hello and welcome. Coming up on World News, a successful international docking in space will turn an astronaut into a cosmonaut of sorts. 2 Russian cosmonauts got some much appreciated visitors in space Saturday. The U.S. space shuttle Atlantis docked with the Mir space station, and the Russians met face-to-face with their U.S. counterparts. CNN's John Holloman has been following the mission and has the details.
The Mir cosmonauts prepared for the docking for hours before it happened. They talked to astronaut Shannon Lucid aboard Atlantis as the 2 ships approached, getting ever closer in the half hour before docking. The first picture of the Russian ship came from a shuttle camera directly beneath the Russian space station. Then, the camera inside the shuttle's docking port showed the flashing light from Mir's docking port. The 2 ships almost perfectly in line. On board the shuttle, Commander Kevin Chilton was at docking controls in the back of the flight deck. The final docking seemed to work like a ballet, with Chilton firing rockets very quickly to make the 2 ships connect without damaging either one.
Looks like we've stabilized and you're go for a ring-in.
After waiting 90 minutes to make sure there were no leaks between the 2 ships, the hatch was opened, and Commander Kevin Chilton and his crew, including new long-term space traveler Shannon Lucid, walked through the docking tunnel and into the Russian spaceship for the first time.
The 2 of you look great.
For Shannon Lucid, this marks the beginning of 142 days aboard Mir, and a new record for U.S. continuous presence in space. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
For the Mir cosmonauts, the docking meant gifts from the Atlantis crew. They each received a chocolate Easter bunny, a blue golf shirt, and an autographed copy of Apollo 13 Commander Jim Lovell's book, Lost Moon. The Russians, in turn, gave Atlantis crew members medallions and emblems depicting a shuttle docked with a space station.
Atlantis hat in der Nacht auf heute an die russische Raumstation Mir angedockt. Das Rendezvous im All verlief planmäßig. An Bord des Shuttles befinden sich 6 Astronauten. Mir und Atlantis bleiben jetzt 6 Tage lang miteinander verbunden.
Hochspannung herrschte bei den NASA-Technikern im Kontrollzentrum kurz vor dem Manöver. Denn nach dem Start des Shuttles am Freitag war das Andocken noch fraglich gewesen. Aus einem Hilfsaggregat für die Steuerung trat Hydraulikflüssigkeit aus. Aber pünktlich um 3:34 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Zeit dockte die Atlantis an die Mir an. Das Shuttle bringt Nahrungsmittel, Wasser und Forschungsmaterial in die Weltraumstation. Außerdem wechselt die 53-jährige Astronautin Shannon Lucid vom Shuttle in die Mir. Sie wird als erste Amerikanerin die nächsten 4,5 Monate in der Weltraumstation verbringen.
Combine science, English, and math with the current space shuttle mission, and you get KidSat, a NASA project that lets students of all ages work on the space program. It's part of their everyday classwork, and as Ann Kellen found out, the students take the job very seriously.
Go to 112. 112. 112. Yep. Orbit number 112. Number 112. So change the orbit number to 112.
KidSat is a combined effort of educators and NASA to give students of all ages hands-on experience with an orbiting space shuttle.
We came up with the idea of putting a camera on the shuttle, actually getting the children involved in choosing their own photos.
National Park 4633 North.
These 7th graders decide what pictures of Earth should be taken from a camera on board the shuttle. This team wants to compare 2 Prince Edward Islands.
So one of them's in Canada. Where's the other one?
There's 2 right by Africa, right here. But they're both on the same orbit.
So this is the orbit here?
Yeah.
And is this where the shuttle's going to go?
Yeah.
This team wants shuttle pictures of a rainforest.
We wanted to see what they look like before they would all be gone.
They're going to pass over there during the day?
We're hoping. If it's daytime, you take a picture of it. But if it's not, you can't.
What kind of vegetation are you looking for?
Teachers at Gompers Middle School are using KidSat and space exploration as a way to teach math, science, and English.
I'm teaching math. I'm teaching about how to find percentages of cloud cover, how to set up proportions so you can measure the perimeter of a state or the length of a river, how to find scale and measurements.
We have to read literature, so why not science fiction? And they love it. Right now we're reading the Martian Chronicles.
A lot of the 7th grade sciences just turn them on to science to show that it could be fun.
Students work as teams. They study the shuttle's orbits, decide what picture they want taken, then submit a proposal to a committee of their peers. With some help, the group decides whether the idea will fly.
Prince Edward Island. They want to see if it's really named after a prince. What does that have to do with the picture? I don't know.
Students deliver the acceptance or rejection notices.
What's wrong with it? The reason for the photo for its beautiful mountain now.
Who wrote that?
Kara.
Why you write that? Mountain Nile. That's what it is. It's a river. It's a narrow. You don't want to take a picture.
You can't just take a picture of Atlantis.
I want to take a picture. Just the new man.
Yeah.
Once accepted, the proposals are sent to the University of California, San Diego, to their own version of mission control.
Right now, current time is 2 hours, 7 minutes, 21 seconds.
This is where high school and college students get involved.
Everybody to the loops, get started. We're going to do a briefing right off the bat.
Now try and search on 9s.
With NASA support, including former astronaut Sally Ride, students practice and prepare for the shuttle launch.
In actually developing software, developing hardware, designing a system, and then going from just the design phase to actually building something and having to make it work by a deadline, which is the deadline of a shuttle mission.
During the mission, students speak directly to NASA's Mission Control in Houston, relaying what pictures to take and when.
And we make sure that nothing goes wrong with the flight software so that all the images get taken. So it really helps put a focus on what I'm doing in my classes.
When a picture is snapped from space, it is sent over the internet to the KidSat classrooms.
Why do we want our picture of Greenland?
It teaches us about different parts of the world.
We learn how to use Alice.
It teaches us about other things besides Earth.
To me, it's fun because you're working with your friends and you know what you're doing.
Right now, 3 middle schools in the United States are involved in KidSat. Eventual plans are for all schools to have access to this hands-on learning from space. Ann Callan, CNN, San Diego, California.
Shuttle and space station travelers embrace their joint mission. Atlantis and Mir are flying as one. Also,
in Houston, it looks like they beat us to the punch here. They gave us our own little kit to operate aboard Mir here. Of course, this is all you need is a spoon when you're in space.
but that was only one of the gifts exchanged when U.S. astronauts and Russian cosmonauts greeted one another after the successful docking of the U.S. space shuttle Atlantis and the Russian space station Mir. Cosmonauts handed their guests patches commemorating their visit. The U.S. crew reciprocated by giving their hosts golf shirts, chocolate and a good book to read.
Die amerikanische Raumfähre Atlantis hat wie geplant an die russische Raumstation Mir angedockt. Pünktlich klinkte der Koppelungsmechanismus ein und verband die beiden Raumflugkörper. 5 Tage soll der Kontakt bestehen bleiben. In dieser Zeit werden 1,7 Tonnen Forschungsmaterialien und 635 Liter Wasser umgeladen. Außerdem wird es sich eine amerikanische Astronautin in der Raumstation bequem machen. 4,5 Monate lang soll sie im All bleiben. Wichtigstes Ziel: neue Erkenntnisse über die Auswirkungen der Schwerelosigkeit.
2 Stunden nach dem Andocken öffnet sich die Schleuse und nach ihren Kollegen schwebt Shannon Lucid in die russische Raumstation, die für fast 5 Monate ihr Zuhause sein wird. Die Mutter 3er Kinder hat zu den chauvinistischen Äußerungen bisher geschwiegen. Die Aufgabe der 53-jährigen amerikanischen Biochemikerin ist jedenfalls nicht das Putzen im All, sondern die Erforschung des Einflusses der Schwerelosigkeit auf den menschlichen Körper. Und dazu wird sie gemeinsam mit ihren 2 russischen Kollegen einen Weltraumspaziergang unternehmen.
It was once a symbol of pride and power for the former Soviet Union. It is now perhaps one of the most profound symbols of its demise.
The Space Center Baikonur is in a catastrophic position. Some areas of the city resemble Leningrad during the siege.
Baikonur, the home of Soviet spaceflight, is now located in another country, Kazakhstan. Giant booster rockets, as well as Russia's version of the space shuttle, the Buran, collect dust in silent testimony to lost potential. It is painful, says Nina Amasova. Just imagine, I spent 25 years of my life working here. We built this place from scratch. Now I feel there's no future. With Russia in tough financial straits, its showcase space program, which once vied with the U.S. for preeminence throughout the Cold War, is now depending on its former enemy for cash. The $400 million the U.S. is paying for use of the Russian space station Mir is more than the Russian government allotted to the space program in its budget last year.
In spite of the difficulties that this country is going through, in spite of the fact that the conditions our people work in are not the best, that they don't get paid enough or receive proper social benefits, they are still, as a rule, enthusiastic.
This joint project reinvigorates both countries' space programs and will certainly help keep Mir in orbit for now. But it is no guarantee that Russia's cash-strapped space program has a future. Siobhan Darrow, CNN, Moscow.
2 Stunden nach dem Andocken der US-amerikanischen Raumfähre Atlantis an die russische Raumstation Mir hat sich die Verbindungsschleuse geöffnet. Die 5 Astronauten, unter ihnen die Biochemikerin Lucid, gingen an Bord der Mir. Sie betrat als erste Amerikanerin eine russische Raumstation. 140 Tage bleibt sie im All, länger als alle US-Astronauten zuvor. Der Aufenthalt der Chemikerin an Bord der Mir dient der Erforschung des Einflusses der Schwerelosigkeit auf den menschlichen Organismus bei Langzeitflügen.
Die 6-köpfige Besatzung der US-Raumfähre Atlantis ist nach einem erfolgreichen Andockmanöver in die russische Orbitalstation umgestiegen. Eine Astronautin, die 53-jährige Shannon Lucid, wird bis August an Bord der Mir bleiben. Ihr Aufenthalt soll neue Erkenntnisse über die Auswirkungen der Schwerelosigkeit auf den Menschen erbringen.
As you well guessed, we're going to be talking about Atlantis. Astronauts aboard the U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis have successfully linked with Russian cosmonauts aboard the Space Center Mir late Saturday. This celestial union between the two nations is paving the way for future space exploration. And here now to give us a better idea of how things are going to be working high up there is John Holloman. John?
Celestial Union. Great choice of words. That's very, very nice. It is moving day aboard the Shuttle Mir combination, flying 392 kilometers above the Earth. The 2 spaceships were docked by Commander Kevin Chilton overnight, and it was a perfect docking, perfect to the second. Right now, the astronauts and the cosmonauts are moving things back and forth in the combined spaceship. This is one of the 2 cosmonauts with a huge box. He's talking to Mission Control in Kaliningrad about what's in the box, but he never did tell us, so we don't really know for sure. But in that mesh bag that's floating around right in the front of your screen right now is a replacement for the parts that were in that box that's going back to the shuttle. So, turns out there are thousands of kilometers of stuff that are back in the shuttle. Let me show you on my shuttle model where the broom closet is aboard the space shuttle. Back here in the Space Hab module, it's normally a science lab, and there's a little science going on there now, but today it is mostly a closet filled with hundreds of bags of equipment which have to be moved from here through this very narrow tunnel. Let me see if I can get the tunnel a little closer to you. The tunnel is here, going up to the docking adapter and then up into the Russian space station Mir. And really, to help me with this, NASA has provided us and the Space Hab people with one of the hundreds of bags that the astronauts are moving.
I was looking to see if that one would be on the video, but it wasn't.
Well, it's one sort of like this, but inside these bags are various things that the astronauts and cosmonauts have to use in their daily work. For example, a space pillow. Shannon Lucid is getting a lot of things that are just sort of custom designed for her into the Russian spaceship, because she's going to be there for 142 days. So
is she going to be floating with this pillow around and sleeping?
Well, in her sleeping quarters, she may not be able to have her head hit the pillow because of weightlessness, but it's there if she wants it. I mean, I don't know about you.
You can't use the phrase, she hit the pillow.
That's right. I mean, sometimes I like to hug my pillow, and maybe that's what she wants to do.
Well, it's too small, but anyway.
Right. Well, anyway, a manual for some of the equipment the astronauts will be using and cosmonauts. They have video cameras, high 8 video cameras on board Mir, and they're out of videotape. So in the bag, one of the bags, a bunch of videotapes for them. And then this is something that's just sort of a sample. It's a video interface unit, which might convert Russian television to American television because the standards that they use to transmit pictures are a little bit different. Shannon Lucid wants to watch CNN International while she's up there because she's found, and other astronauts who've been in space for long periods of time find they get disconnected from the news back here on Earth. And the folks at Mission Control in Kaliningrad have figured out a way to beam up CNN International to the Russian space station once or several times a week, depending on how much time they have to do it. And she'll get to watch this show and others from space, so that she won't be totally disconnected from the news events on Earth.
So what are the personal stuff that she can take up there?
Almost anything you could have on Earth, as long as it doesn't get affected by weightlessness. I mean, underarm deodorant is not spray, because sprays would just go wild in weightlessness. You have, you know, roll-on type deodorant. Other products that she'd need for personal hygiene are in these bags and going across. And it's sort of like packing for a very long camping trip, I suppose.
What about personal hygiene? Showers?
Well, it's generally, astronauts like to do sponge baths rather than showers. They have, in the past, tried a shower on Mir. Doesn't work very well. It's hard to do in weightlessness because, you know, you need gravity to help you get the water out of the shower head and down on your body. It's, you know, the aroma inside the Russian space station, and I use aroma as politely as I can, is something to behold, people tell us. We'll have a conversation with Shannon Lucid after she gets settled in aboard Mir, and we'll talk to her about what it was like when she walked in there and took her first whiff of air in Mir, because it's some people have described it as almost overpowering.
So what are they going to do about it? She has to spend 5 months there.
It turns out you get used to it. Have you ever walked out in a field of onions or garlic or something that has or even a patch of roses? You walk in and you get overpowered by the smell, but within 5 or 10 minutes your brain sort of compensates for it and you get used to it, and that's what will happen with her. But here, during the time that the Mir and shuttle are docked, what is happening is that the shuttle's air purification system is grabbing air from Mir, sucking it in, purifying it, and putting it back in, so that there is enough breathable air for the 8 people who are aboard Mir right now, and also so it will, at least for the next few days, smell better.
And speaking of smells and all personal hygiene, what about waste? What does Mir do about waste?
It's about the same thing that the shuttle does. You couldn't have a giant holding tank like you'd have in a recreational vehicle for a space station that's been there for 10 years. It would, whatever septic tank you have would fill up after 10 years. And what they do, astronauts and cosmonauts, is they have a system that dumps this out into space. And you say, what if you're doing a spacewalk while this, you know, human and other waste goes out into space? If you're traveling 17,000 miles an hour, as they are, then the waste is left way behind. So you don't do a waste dump while you have people out doing a spacewalk, because that would be bad. But you could go outside 5 minutes after, no problem.
Well, that's good to hear.
It is.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. It's always very interesting to talk to you, John. Thank you.
Well, it's so fun to be with you.
CNN's John Holloman.
The Mir space station is seen from the cargo bay of Shuttle Atlantis. The 2 spaceships now joined at the red docking tunnel supplied on a previous shuttle trip to Mir. You can see the tunnel at the bottom of your screen. Inside, the astronauts and cosmonauts have become moving men and women, bringing more than 2 tons of water and other supplies to the space station from the shuttle and carrying broken parts of the Russian ship into Space Lab in the shuttle's cargo bay for a trip to the repair shop back on Earth. While some astronauts were doing heavy lifting in weightlessness, others were beginning experiments in material science and biomedical research in a glove box on the Atlantis side of the joint spaceship. Something you don't get to see often, the Earth spinning 240 miles below the orbiting Russian-American laboratory. It's cloudy over much of the planet right now. One of the new experiments this trip is called KidSat. There's a camera on board Atlantis that can be remote controlled by youngsters in classrooms all over the U.S. The pictures they're getting are sometimes as good as these. Now, these pictures look like something from science fiction, but they're real. Different camera angles as Atlantis approached Mir during the weekend docking. It was conducted while the 2 ships were orbiting 245 miles up over Russia and much of Europe and Asia. And we got to see the cosmonauts' eye view of the hatch opening ceremony. There was a big bear hug between the commanders of the 2 ships before the Atlantis crew got to come aboard Mir. For astronaut Shannon Lucid, who you can see floating around in the middle of your screen here, this was day 1 of 142 days as a member of the Mir crew. By the time she gets home in August, she'll have been in space longer than any other American. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
2 Tage nach dem Andocken der US-Raumfähre Atlantis werden die mitgebrachten Ausrüstungsgegenstände und Lebensmittel umgeladen. Die amerikanische Astronautin Shannon Lucid, die sich das 5. Mal im All aufhält, hat inzwischen mit ihren Forschungen begonnen. Sie soll bis August in der russischen Station bleiben und damit einen neuen nationalen Langzeitrekord im All aufstellen. Die Atlantis wird voraussichtlich am Donnerstag zur Erde zurückkehren.
There's Rich and Rick taking off a docking ring from a gyrodyne. We brought up a new one and brought back a used one. We also transferred nearly 1,500 pounds of water. This is a byproduct of the shuttle's power system. So we removed iodine from our system and supplied minerals and biocide, and then transferred these water bags to the Mir space station. This is going through the shuttle side. There's some empty food containers which we returned to Earth from the Mir station. And finally working our way to the docking module. There's temporary stowage in the white mesh bags of food containers containing many of the supplies that will help Shannon and Yuri in the coming months. We transferred nearly 2 tons of science hardware over and nearly 1 ton back. This is a Kurs system used for navigation on the approach and docking for the Russian system that will be brought back and refurbished. We also needed to keep track of the items that went over to Mir and those that we're returning back to Earth. So Chile and I are making sure that we have all of the items in our inventory management system in order. The blue box on the left-hand side is a refrigerator freezer in which we brought back urine, blood, and saliva samples. The glove box in which Linda is working is where we carried on some of the technology development as well as fundamental biology for a joint effort between the U.S. and several European countries. Here are lentil seeds, and the investigation here is for statocyte polarity. We had several experiments in biology. The middeck is where we had lunch with the Mir 21 crew on dock day. We went over for dinner in the base block of Mir to enjoy Russian food. Each night, if we had a chance, we sent mail messages by way of a laptop computer, and you see Shannon doing just that, back to her family. On 3 separate days, we saw the comet. Many of you may have seen it here, Hakataki, in which it was very bright.
Well, the nighttime skies are offering the last chances in some 10,000 years to get a really good look at the comet called Hyakutake. This comet's at its best now, can be seen just below the Big Dipper, at least in the northern hemisphere. Hyakutake is about 16 kilometers wide, but its glittering tail is blown out for more than 99,000 kilometers. This is the brightest comet to come near the Earth in some 20 years.
Frische Wäsche und 2 Osterhasen aus Schokolade für die beiden russischen Kosmonauten gehörten zur Ladung der Raumfähre Atlantis, die an die russische Orbitalstation Mir andockte. Für 5 amerikanische Astronauten ist es ein Kurztrip zu den Sternen. Nur Shannon Lucid soll mit den 2 Russen rund 5 Monate im All bleiben. Ein Trost für sie, den heißen Sommer in Amerika kann sie aus luftiger Höhe betrachten.
Doch heute dem Kontrollzentrum Bericht über die russisch-amerikanische Zusammenarbeit. Gestern hatte die Mannschaft tonnenweise Nahrungsmittel, Wasser und Geräte durch einen Verbindungsschacht von der Raumfähre Atlantis zur Mir gebracht. Die Atlantis kehrt am Samstag zur Erde zurück.
In a Spaced Earth news conference several hours ago, Lucid said she liked life on Mir so far. She's now an official member of the Mir crew and is to live there for 5 months. But before she moved in, one Russian official made a controversial comment. He suggested she'd be doing the cleaning because she's a woman. What does she think of that?
That kind of thinking doesn't bother me. I mean, I'm here, and we all work together to keep the place, you know, pretty tidy. And I think that, of course, there's a place for all people, men and women of many different nationalities on board space station.
Mir and the Space Shuttle Atlantis are still docked and looking ahead to a historic space walk about 12 hours from now. CNN International plans live coverage.
Die US-Astronauten sind mit der Raumfähre Atlantis zu Besuch bei ihren russischen Kollegen auf der Weltraumstation Mir. 6 Stunden soll der Aufenthalt im All dauern. Die US-Astronauten wollen die Umgebung der Mir erforschen und die Außenhaut der Station auf Schäden untersuchen.
CNN's John Holloman joins us now to tell us more about the mission. John?
Talk about international cooperation, Bettina. This is great. The Russians have never really been willing to let people from other countries poke around outside their space station, and the fact that they are willing to do that is a sign. The astronauts are a little bit behind schedule in starting their spacewalk. They're about 45 minutes late. I think we've got some live pictures to show you from the cargo bay of Shuttle Atlantis. These are two views of the port where the astronauts will crawl out, the airlock, which they will leave from to get out into space in just about 30 minutes from right now. As I say, they were a little bit behind schedule in getting ready for this because of some problems with the spacesuit of Rich Clifford, one of the two spacewalking astronauts. He and Linda Godwin have been breathing pure oxygen for the past several hours to make sure their bodies are not affected by the extremely low pressure of space. The hatches between Shuttle Atlantis and Space Station Mir have been closed for the past 12 hours so that the shuttle's internal pressure can be lowered. Before we go further, let me use our Space Hab provided model to show you just where that live picture you were seeing from space is actually coming from. I don't even know if we can see this shot, but I'll try to tilt the shuttle model over. The airlock that the astronauts will be coming out of is right here, just behind the crew cabin. And that picture that you saw on TV a few minutes ago is a picture of what that looks like from cameras in the cargo bay. At any rate, the main goal of this spacewalk, which we have some animation to illustrate for you, will be to take a couple of panels that are back in the back of the cargo bay. There you see an animated spacewalking astronaut taking those panels and walking them back to the front of the shuttle where the Mir is attached. That big reddish-looking docking tunnel is where these panels will be attached. Once the panels are mounted, they'll be opened up to expose the space station construction material included on those panels to space. More than a year from now, another crew will pick up the panels and bring them back to Earth. Idea is to see whether the environment of space, which is much different from the environment down here, is going to damage things like paint chips or pieces of material that the exterior of the space station could be constructed of. And if it turns out that they're not damaged, that means they kind of make the grade and they'll be able to be used on the International Space Station, which is still under construction down here.
How difficult is this spacewalk?
Every spacewalk is difficult because it's a totally new environment for the people who do it. They train in a water tank where there is sort of a neutral buoyancy so that they're floating sort of like they would in space. It's dangerous because the only thing connecting them to the space shuttle or to the Mir is a tether, sort of like that tether that was on the Italian satellite that broke. Back here's a more live picture of showing you the hatch, the airlock. When it opens at, I guess it's 6:43 GMT, what we'll see is the two astronauts with their heads popping out of there, and they'll go out and begin to do their work in space. So it's difficult, it's dangerous. A spacesuit is not as safe as a space station or a space shuttle because it's thin material. And we'll be watching with somewhat bated breath to see just how they do. It's more difficult to crawl around out there. It is extraordinarily cold in space. They have heated gloves to keep their fingers warmer and heated socks. It's going to be a very interesting 6 hours.
And you can watch it right here on CNN International because, of course, we plan live coverage. Thank you very much, John. See you later.
First spacewalk ever conducted by American astronauts outside the Russian space station Mir. The hatch opened on the Shuttle Atlantis about 2.5 minutes ago, and the two astronauts, Rich Clifford and Linda Godwin, are outside. We don't have live pictures to show you the hatch opening as yet, but you can see in these pictures the back edge of the hatch had begun to come up. The astronauts are now out in the cargo bay. NASA promises us live picture in about 10 or 12 minutes from now. As soon as we get those pictures, we will share them with you. NASA, I think what we can do at this moment, perhaps, is let you listen to some of the conversation between astronauts Linda Godwin and Mission Control, and also astronaut Rich Clifford. The communication, they say, is very sporadic. Their two-way radios inside their spacesuits aren't working as well as they had hoped. Let's see if we can hear something from them right now.
Thermal cover and egressing the tunnel adapter. Yes. Should we attach the right tether to the starboard safety tether?
Linda Godwin now in the process of leaving the hatch for the open cargo bay of Atlantis. She'll be followed just a moment or two later by Rich Clifford as they begin to set up their tools and hardware at various work sites in the cargo bay for their 6 hours of activity.
The voice you can hear clearly is that of Rob Navius, a NASA commentator at NASA's Mission Control in Houston. The more scratchy voices are those of the astronauts out in space. NASA has prepared about a 5-minute walkthrough of everything that's going to happen over the next 6 hours as these two astronauts make history by climbing around on the outside of Mir, and we'll have a look at that together right now.
The 6-hour spacewalk in Atlantis' payload bay will be the first such venture for American astronauts while the shuttle is docked to the Russian space station Mir. Mission specialists Linda Godwin and Rich Clifford will don their spacesuits to tackle two objectives: to test new common foot restraints and tethers that can be used for both Russian and American spacewalkers, which are adaptable for both Russian and American spacesuits, and to attach a series of experiment packages called the Mir Environmental Effects Payload, or MEEP, to the surface of Mir's recently installed docking module.
Our main goal of the EVA is to detach 4 packages from the rear of the payload bay and attach them to handrails on the docking module.
We come out of what's called the tunnel adapter, which is an opening between the normal shuttle airlock and the orbiter docking system, which will eventually be the airlock for future flights. And we immediately go each of us go to the sidewalls of the shuttle and transfer our tethers to a new common tether system.
While attached to the side of Atlantis' payload bay, Clifford and Godwin will slip their booted feet into the new common foot restraint, then slowly move from the side of the cargo bay to Mir's bright orange docking module, where they will install the 4 MEEP packages.
We'll remove 1 MEEP at a time, attach it to a new device on the side of our extravehicular mobility units, and translate with that 75-pound suitcase, which is about 3.5 feet by 3.5 feet, up to a work site on the Mir.
We'll fold these packages back, kind of like opening a suitcase that bends all the way around, and expose those surfaces that were inside now to the outside until it's picked up by a later shuttle crew, probably in over a year from now. And it'll be looking at orbital debris, looking at how, on some of the packages, how the surface coatings, which might be something that would be outside of a future space station, are going to weather in that time. You know, what are they going to see in terms of the Mir environment, a real space station environment?
One of the samples is different paint samples that we expect to paint our space structures and find out after 18 months of exposure what are their characteristics, and will they off-gas, will they provide particle debris for the science experiments. But overall, we're learning operational procedures for space station assembly, and then science experiments to gather criteria for better construction of our station.
Godwin and Clifford will confine their spacewalk to the payload bay of Atlantis and a line of demarcation on the Mir itself.
And there is a line that we're supposed to not cross, which is the interface between the docking module and the Russian docking interface, because they're worried about us translating up there with our wires and getting them crossed and damaging some hardware.
Should the astronauts' tethers become entangled or detached from their suits at any time during the spacewalk, the shuttle will be unable to rescue them because it will remain docked to the Mir. Commander Kevin Chilton says the astronauts would have to rely solely on small jetpacks, nicknamed SAFER, for simplified aid for EVA rescue, to propel themselves back to the shuttle. The SAFER units were first tested during an untethered shuttle spacewalk in 1994.
In the past, when we do EVAs free from Mir, we always had the ability, should a EVA crew member become untethered, to fly the shuttle over and rescue them. That's why they treat us pilots so well. But in this case, since we're docked to Mir, we don't have that luxury.
SAFER allows you to deploy to activate a system which will give you attitude stability and give you approximately 6 feet per second of propellant for you to propel yourself back to some part of the structure to grab a hold of. So we don't plan on using SAFER. It's there should we need it. It's an emergency rescue device only.
While Godwin and Clifford conduct their work around Mir's docking module, Mir-21 Commander Yuri Anufrienko and flight engineer Yuri Usachev will be straining for a view out of the space station's windows.
We've talked to Yuri and Yuri about this, and their big disappointment in this whole EVA is the fact that they can't be out there with us. And the second disappointment is that there's only one viewport that they can watch our activities. So they would like to take some fairly good pictures of us working on their docking module, but because of the interference of the solar arrays, there's only one view that they can get, and it's looking down at the aft of the docking module and just directly over the space hatch.
The experiment package to be installed on the docking module is expected to be retrieved during the next U.S. spacewalk at the Mir in the fall of 1997, on the 7th Joint Shuttle Mir docking mission, during which 2 astronauts and 2 cosmonauts are scheduled to take an excursion outside their respective spacecraft.
That video provided to us by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the United States. We're expecting the first live pictures of the 2 astronauts out in the cargo bay about 8 minutes from right now. We'll try to get back with you when that happens. Just before we go, the astronauts are at this moment, at this point on the space shuttle. This is the airlock. The docking adapter is here with the Mir. The astronauts are coming up, and over the next 5 or 10 minutes, they'll hook up to handrails here, slide down to this end of the shuttle where those experiment packages are bolted to the side of the shuttle, here, 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 and here. Then they'll, again, translate, NASA's word for crawl, back up to where the Mir is located and begin to mount those packets here. It's going to be a very interesting 6 hours that we will spend together during this spacewalk. We'll have help from a couple of astronauts who've conducted spacewalks before and from an official of the Spacehab Corporation that makes this module in the back of the shuttle and who has provided us some interesting visual aids throughout this mission about what the astronauts are doing in addition to the spacewalk tonight. We urge you to stay with CNN International. We'll provide you complete live coverage throughout the 6-hour spacewalk outside the space station Mir. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
John Holloman joins us now to tell us more about the mission. John?
Bettina, we have live pictures, and when we do, we ought to see them more than my face. Let's take you out to the cargo bay of Shuttle Atlantis right now. That's the airlock that the 2 astronauts climbed out of just about 20 minutes ago. They are now out in space. This is astronaut Linda Godwin. She is in a spacesuit that has red stripes on it, and if you look at sort of the middle center of your screen, you can see her her red stripe. Astronaut Rich Clifford is out behind her and to the left in the cargo bay.
This camera view inside the payload bay of Atlantis, looking over Linda Godwin's shoulder as she watches Rich Clifford back in the airlock of the tunnel adapter of Atlantis, recovering the clamps that will ultimately be affixed to the handrails on the space station Mir's docking module.
There are a lot of tools and parts that are down there in the airlock that the astronauts have to get in place on the outside of the space shuttle and the outside of the space station Mir before they can do their major task. That major task will be coming up in about 2 to 3 hours from right now. You can hear the voice of a Russian commentator talking to the Russian cosmonauts inside Mir about what's going on out in the space station so that everybody knows what's going on. The Russians quite sensitive about anything that the astronauts might do to damage the outside of their space station. And so the astronauts have been given some limits as to where they can go. They're going to stay almost exclusively on this big red docking tunnel that a previous shuttle mission, Bettina, attached to Mir about 4 or 5 months ago. And with that tunnel in place, it's something that the Americans built and brought up to Mir, then there's something that the Russians are sure will not do any damage to the very delicate, thin solar panels on their space station or the other pieces of equipment that are mounted outside of it. The effort of doing a spacewalk is extraordinarily tiring to astronauts. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I've talked to several astronauts who do them, and they say when they get back in after 6 hours outside, they are ready for a good night's sleep. Among other reasons, because it's tense being out there because you don't have the protection that you have when you're inside the space shuttle, or in the case of the cosmonauts, the Mir space station, or the shuttle if you're an American astronaut. Sure.
Tell us a little bit about this, the jet packs that they have, these little backpacks, so to speak.
Yeah,
that
it's sort of hard to see them. They look, if you look at them now, you can see Linda Godwin outside in sort of the rear of the hatch there. It looks sort of like a parachute. It's much more than that. It's a nitrogen-powered rocket, sort of like something out of Buck Rogers in, 40, 50 years ago. We've lost our picture from Mir for just a second, but I can talk to you about these jetpacks while we wait for the picture to come back, and I'm sure we'll see it again as soon as it does come back. But they give the astronauts a little extra bit of security. When they're outside in space, they always want to be connected to a rope. They call it a tether, but there are wires that are all along the cargo bay. This is a replay of some tape from I'm sorry, we're back to live picture now. But these tether wires are strung along the cargo bay, and they go up to the side of Mir, or will after the astronauts string them there. The worst case for an astronaut in a situation like this would be that if the tether wire broke and the astronauts were then just sort of floating free in space. They cannot afford to be there in a spacewalk. When you're not connected to the space station, the shuttle can be driven to where you are. It can just come and pick you up. In this situation, because the mass of the shuttle and the station is so great, the shuttle can't move. It's stuck, and the astronaut has to do something to get him or herself back to a place of safety. And these backpacks provide the crew members a little bit of extra margin of safety in case everything goes wrong and all the ropes break. They will immediately be able to just use the jetpack to get themselves back to safety.
Give us a sense of how close Mir and Atlantis are. What's the space these two astronauts are now working in?
Well, let me get our director to come back to a live picture of me with our shuttle model. If you can make the picture a little bit wider, I don't know if it's possible to widen out. You can see the shuttle itself. We don't have a model of Mir to show you yet. Hopefully we'll get one someday. But that docking tunnel is right here where my hand would be. And the Russian space station is arrayed through this entire area. So the astronauts continue to work right up here around the airlock. And if they were to move 15 feet, they would be at the docking tunnel. If they were to move 30 feet, they'd be up against a solar panel. So yeah, it's a 10 meters to big trouble for these guys. They're going to have to be working in a very narrow range of space right now. And if you watch what's on television right now, you can see they have tools. Those things that look like rings with metal things behind them are the connectors that they use to hook themselves to these tether wires. You're very clumsy if you're in a spacesuit. And you'd think if you and I were up there and we had these two pieces of metal to take outside and hand to our partner, it'd be 5 seconds of work. But they keep sort of falling back down inside, and Rich Clifford, who is inside, is having a good bit of difficulty getting them up to hand them to Linda Godwin, who you see outside in space. She doesn't have the bright lights, the fluorescent lights that are down in the airlock, so she doesn't look as bright as Rich Clifford does down inside.
John, we have to take a short break here now. Please stay with CNN International. We, of course, will bring you much more live coverage directly out of space. Stay with us. We are back here on World News with continuous live coverage of the spacewalk of two U.S. astronauts outside of the Russian space station Mir. John Holloman with us here. John, how important is this spacewalk today?
It is not important in the biggest picture of all, Bettina. What they're going to do is unfold a couple of 75-pound suitcase-sized experimental pallets outside Mir. It's important in gaining the confidence of the Russians and the Americans that they can work together with the Americans walking around outside the Russian space station. That's the big significance of this. And anytime you have astronauts outside or cosmonauts outside, it is a somewhat dangerous time for all of them. So its significance is in the ability to cooperate more than the ability to do a great deal of useful work. What they're doing is these equipment cases, these suitcase-looking things, have things, for example, like samples of different sorts of paint that could be used to paint the outside of the International Space Station. If you look at the outside of Mir, and probably during the spacewalk we'll get to see some of the outside of Mir, you'll see places where the paint has been chipped by micro-meteorites, little pieces of space dust that have just banged into it. And so ground managers and experts say, well, we don't want to use that kind of paint because it gets damaged by the micro-meteorites. And there'll be samples of other kinds of paint that can be put on the International Space Station before it's launched that might be more able to withstand this sort of activity. The panels themselves, the experimental panels, will be outside for 18 months. And in that period of time, flying at the same orbital attitude, which means distance away from the equator, that the joint International Space Station is going to fly, they'll be able to see if space debris is different close to the North and South Pole, rather than where the U.S. shuttle normally flies much closer to the equator. The painstaking process of getting these tether clamps out continues there in space. Turns out that the Mir space station is not designed to use the normal clamps that NASA astronauts use when they're working on the shuttle. The reason for that being that the bars that you hook onto outside Mir are much larger diameter than the bars that were built on the shuttle, which has been in space with bars a lot less time. So they had to redesign special clamps to do this hooking up. One more thing that sort of complicates this, but it's something the astronauts are trying to test out.
Now, these two astronauts, of course, will come back to Earth shortly, while another one, Shannon Lucid, is going to stay on Mir. How long are they going to be together, these two here up in space?
The two who are outside? Or
the two who are outside.
They'll be outside in space for about 6 hours, and they'll go back inside and come home Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, depending on the weather in Florida. Shannon Lucid has been aboard the Mir for 3 days as a Mir crew person. She has 139 days to go, and she said in a news conference about this time last night that she would be really sort of happy when the shuttle leaves and she can get down to the work that she is up there to do and not have to be worrying about mixing her needs from her astronaut buddies with her needs for her cosmonaut buddies. The two cosmonauts who are aboard Mir with her will be coming home in a couple of months, but they will be replaced by additional cosmonauts, and a cosmonaut from the European Space Agency who is a woman from France. So she won't be the only woman aboard the Mir for a very long time. She'll have some female companionship as well as a bunch of young male cosmonauts who she'll be performing medical experiments on.
And of course, that just begs the question: what language are they talking in?
They're speaking kind of a combination of Russian and English, and when the French woman arrives, French. It's very difficult for astronauts to learn Russian. Well, let me show you something. On the left side of your screen now, you can see a thing that looks like a big metal box attached to the front of astronaut Linda Godwin. That is something called a mini workstation, and what it is a place where you can hook your tools. It's a little box with a bunch of appendages on it where you can hook tools. It's something NASA's been testing for about 1.5 years, and this is one of the first times that they're using it in an actual job outside in space, so that it seems to be working pretty well. I believe...
Okay, that's done.
Okay, I think we see both astronauts now outside, so we don't have to worry so much about them coming and going from inside the shuttle. They're both out there, and perhaps we'll get a different camera angle in the next few minutes. We'll be able to see them as they do their walk down through the space station and the space shuttle itself and get to work on Mir.
What is the status of the International Space Station that so many countries are working on?
Big pieces of it are under construction. And they haven't done the outer skin completely yet, and they won't until this panel that the astronauts are mounting today gets brought back to Earth for reattachment. But the parts for the inside are being manufactured. Daniel Golden, the administrator of NASA, says we're not talking about some future space station. We have hardware that is being built now on the ground. NASA's got a program to do this for the lowest possible cost, they think, so that the U.S. portion of it is underway. They're still in discussion and negotiation with the Japanese, the Canadians, the French, and those other nations and consortia, the European Space Agency is doing its part. Everybody is on board here despite the very complex nature of international political negotiation on who's going to pay for this, although everybody signed a contract to pay for that country's part when they're supposed to. It's very complex, and you have to be a diplomat, I think, as well as a space agency manager for the various space agencies to see this come to fruition. But it looks like it's really going to happen. A year ago, I would have given it 50-50 odds. They're building so much stuff now. I think by the end of next year, we will see the first element of the International Space Station up in space.
It's exciting, and we're going to be there.
Yeah.
And please stay with CNN International, because we're going to stay with these spacewalking astronauts for the next few hours, and John is going to spend the night with us. It's nighttime now here. And we are back now. Welcome back to World News. We are following the spacewalk of 2 U.S. astronauts outside of the Russian space station Mir. CNN's John Holliman with us here. What's happening now? There's a great picture coming in now.
They've gotten to where they wanted to go, Bettina. What you see there in that picture is the 2 astronauts connected now to the Mir space station. The red docking tunnel, which was brought up by previous shuttle crew to make the Mir stick out a little further into space, make it easier to dock a shuttle with it, is where they're going to attach these experiment packs. And you can see the 2 astronauts there. Rich Clifford is on the left. He is the the spacewalk astronaut number 2. Linda Godwin, the lead spacewalker, is on the right. You can tell the difference between the two because Godwin has red stripes on her outfit and Clifford does not. They've accomplished something that they were most concerned about doing. They are now attached to the Russian space station. This is the good stuff for these astronauts. Now that they're up there, they're going to be able to do their work. They're preparing now to get tether lines attached where they are right there. And once they get those attached, they'll go back and get those experimental panels that are back in the back of the space shuttle and bring them up there and hook them up. It appears from my reading of what NASA calls the timeline, which is sort of their master plan, that after a late start, because of some problems with Clifford's spacesuit, they're now moving a little bit ahead of schedule. They're where they are a little bit sooner than NASA planners had thought they would be, and that's pretty good.
What can you tell us about the two astronauts here?
Well, they're interesting people. Linda Godwin is a veteran NASA astronaut. She was born in 1952. One of the things that's most interesting about her when she is not walking in space, as you see her doing there on the left of your screen, is she likes to play the saxophone and the clarinet.
And we are wondering, did she bring any of those instruments?
That's right. We don't know yet. We know there was an arrival ceremony with the astronauts and cosmonauts in which she did not play the saxophone or the clarinet. The clarinet probably a little bit more portable than the saxophone. It might be there. There's going to be a departure ceremony before the two spaceships pull apart, and we'll see, I think. Rich Clifford is a West Point graduate, the United States Military Academy, an Army pilot, helicopter pilot, fixed-wing airplane pilot, a lot of experience as an astronaut. He's won the Legion of Merit, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, National Intelligence Medal. On one of his space flights, he and his astronaut partners launched one of these top-secret military satellites. We would call it a spy satellite if we didn't know better. And so he has been out in space before doing things like this, but he's never conducted a spacewalk. And this is a first-time experience for both of these astronauts. They've been training in a series of water tanks that NASA has for about a year in what it might feel like to be there. And they always tell me, and we'll be talking to them here on CNN International in a day or two when they get back inside and ready to pack up for home, about what it did feel like to step outside for the first time. But they always say it's different from what it was like in that water tank.
Yeah, I bet you. Explain to us more, how do these little tethers work? What kind of information is coming through those tethers,
well,
if any at all?
There's not really information, and they're very difficult to see. If you look at the word live at the lower right of your TV screen, you can see a very thin white wire coming right now between the L and the I and going down off the screen. You might probably have to look closely for that. That is the tether for astronaut Linda Godwin. It goes back down to the Space Shuttle cargo bay. And you can see what she's doing. She's sort of moving around with a spotlight in her hand now. And if she didn't have that wire attached and she, well, there we go. There's a much better picture. You can see the tether wire. It's sort of vibrating as she moves out there on the end of the Mir space station. And both astronauts have these. The thing that attaches their spacesuits to the tether are those larger pieces of metal that you can sort of see hanging down, particularly on astronaut Clifford on the left of your screen. His tether connector is hanging down. It's attached to that wire. If something were to happen and they let go with their hands, that tether would allow them to stay basically where they are. And it doesn't really transmit information. It just transmits a nice warm feeling of safety that they're not going to be lost in space.
Yeah.
If for some reason the tether wires broke, that's when they'd have to use these gas-powered backpacks to force their bodies back to where they are right now. You can't see it very much, but at the top of your screen, the white piece of material that's there on the top of the red connector is a big piece of the Mir space station. That's the majority of the Russian space station connected there in that multiple docking adapter. It's got places to hook up a bunch of different things at once.
Some practical things. How cold is it where they are, and how do they get oxygen? How does that work?
They have oxygen built into their spacesuits. There are oxygen tanks that they're breathing from. Outside in space, it is more than 400 degrees below zero, I think, especially in darkness where they're working right now. When they get into the sunlight, it's a whole different story. And in about 20 minutes, they'll be in sunlight, so we'll probably get to see that. they have insulation in their spacesuits. They have heating and air conditioning units inside the spacesuits. The air conditioning unit consists of a series of thin, pencil-thin tubes that go around their torsos, their middle parts of their body. And those tubes, look, we're going to watch sunrise. Pretty dramatic to see the sun come up in space.
Beautiful picture.
Yeah, and the heaters will probably shut down. The air conditioner will probably shut on pretty soon as they go from darkness to daylight.
One of the last shuttle missions, there was a little problem with how heat, or better, cold protective those gloves, for example, were.
Yeah.
Did they improve the gloves?
Yeah, the gloves are much better. We've talked to astronauts who've tried the improved gloves outside the shuttle. And you're right, this was, I guess, about a year ago when we heard these astronauts out there really complaining about how cold they were getting. And they've tested a new set of gloves, and the new gloves work better than the old gloves. And so these folks should be toasty and comfy. I don't know if we have time to listen in for maybe a half minute to what the astronauts are saying and what NASA's commentator Rob Navius can tell us about how things are going at this moment.
Parallel to the handrail stanchion on number 1. Okay.
That's the cargo bay of the shuttle that you see there, and the tail of the shuttle. Now the camera is tilting up to the side of the Mir tunnel where, do we see red stripes? I think we do. I think that's Linda Godwin, is working to make sure her tether wire is attached.
What exactly is the brown material?
Now, zooming in on Linda Godwin as she completes the installation of the clamps
the actual
on the handrails of the docking module.
Docking module, the NASA guy called it.
Right behind her is a partially folded solar array attached to the Crystal Science module. The Mir space station directly above the two spacewalkers as they work on the initial phase of their spacewalk, which is expected to last 5.5 to 6 hours this morning. On Godwin's back, as is on the back of Rich Clifford, is the SAFER unit, the self-contained aid for EVA rescue, the emergency jet backpack that either of the spacewalkers would use in the unlikely event they would become untethered from their lifelines in the cargo bay.
So the astronauts now are working 10 to 15 meters above the cargo bay of the space shuttle, and it's the furthest away from the safety of the shuttle's cargo bay astronauts have worked. Certainly when the shuttle is attached to a space station owned and operated by another country. You can sort of see the tether wire on Linda's side vibrate there as the sunlight begins to hit it as she works there. Now,
on, number 3 is installed, and the lock lever's pointing toward Mir.
Sounds good. One last check that the right orientation and the clamp is close locked.
The clamp is what this suitcase-size experimental unit will hook to. It's a picture from the cargo bay of the Shuttle Atlantis, and you can see, just for a second there, Bettina, one of those tether wires that runs down. Let me see if I can get our model back in the picture here for a moment. And on the model, that tether wire would come down this side of the shuttle, and you can see that sort of in the top of the picture as we saw the Shuttle Atlantis out there in space. It is always fascinating to me, as we go back to the live picture, how you can operate upside down. I don't know if you were able to listen to Linda Godwin as she was talking, but it sounded like she was out of breath. It sounded like she was tired already, and she's been out in space for 48 minutes or so far.
How hard is it physically?
It's hard physically because the spacesuit is such a clumsy thing to wear. You know, you and I are sitting here in our nice TV clothes, and we just walk around and move our arms back and forth without any difficulty. Our viewers at home, same way. But when you have this thing on, everything in it is designed to protect you, but it also makes bending your knee much more difficult, bending your arm much more difficult. They've tried to make joints in these spacesuits that make them operate more easily, but it's still tough. You've got something like 11 layers of material between your body and the outside world when you wear this thing, and it's It's just bulky, and it's like you're wearing, you know, 8 or 10 potato sacks, one inside the other, and trying to move around. It is difficult. We were talking about the brown-looking thing there on the screen. That is the docking tunnel. That's the latest, the newest addition to the outside of the Mir space station. And there it is, better view of it. You see both astronauts there between the camera and the docking tunnel. And you can see that huge solar panel on the left.
Okay, just another check.
How big is their support staff, so to speak, in space? How many astronauts, how many cosmonauts are there?
Well, during the spacewalk, there's one astronaut whose job it is to stay in touch with him. Ron Sega is the one that you hear talking to him, who doesn't sound like he's out of breath because he's nice and comfy inside Atlantis. There are 3 other astronauts now on board the shuttle, the pilot, the commander, and
Rich Clifford on the left, Linda Godwin on the right, completing the installation of the clamps on the handrails of the docking module for the housing of the micrometeoroid and debris experiment packages comprising the so-called MEEP experiments. They are attaché cases which will fold open at 90-degree angles to expose a variety of materials to the environment of space and the collection of data about the environment around the orbiting space station Mir.
At any rate, the astronauts are...
2 spacewalking astronauts will soon make their way towards the docking module camera.
Looking for the window that Yuri and Shannon are looking out of.
Huh. The 3 people aboard the Mir are looking out the window, Bettina. We talked about that a minute ago. They're playing peekaboo with the spacewalkers now. And
how much can you actually help from the inside?
If
Clifford and Godwin will
you're about to drop a tool and the guys inside could see it, they could tell you about it. The 3 people inside that reddish brown canister are not really. They're probably sightseeing more than they're trying to help, but if there was a need for help, they could do it. There's a spare spacesuit, too, in case one of these guys got in trouble and somebody else needed to go out and get them. It would be possible over a period of time to provide some help. But they're on the buddy system outside, so if one of them got in trouble, the other one would help them, probably. It's certainly in the plan.
And, of course, we'll stay with Atlantis and Mir, and we continue our live coverage here. But first, we're going to... And welcome back. We are spacewalking, or better, we are watching how 2 U.S. astronauts outside of the Russian space station Mir are doing the first ever American spacewalk outside of Mir. John Holloman is with us, our space expert. What's happening now? There are 2 astronauts now carrying around a camera,
yeah,
I believe.
It's interesting, Bettina. When this module was attached, the big red part was attached to Mir on the last shuttle trip to Mir. There's a camera, which you see there between the 2 astronauts. It's hard to tell it's a camera, but when Rich Clifford gets out of the way, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. But it was used to help them guide this big docking tunnel into place. Well, there's the planet. The Shuttle Atlantis combo is flying obviously over Europe right now because it's bright daylight. Looks like it's almost midday there. And this is not a very good view of that camera, but the camera is no longer needed because the red tunnel has been attached to Mir. The only way to get it off is to go out and take a spacewalk to do it. Now you can see the camera just sort of to the middle of your screen. We'll listen to NASA commentator Rob Navius.
Process of removing the docking module camera for stowage in the shuttle's airlock and its eventual return back to Earth.
If you're watching us in Western Europe right now and it is not cloudy where you are, you might want to go outside. Look straight up. That's where they are. They're flying at 17,000 miles an hour. It takes them about a minute to get from the western horizon to the eastern horizon. And the 2 spaceships together have so much, it's the equivalent of 2 747 jetliners touching each other going through space. And in the early morning sun where they are right now, you'd certainly be able to see them if it's not completely cloudy. But as we were looking down at Western Europe, it looked like it was fairly cloudy in most places. At any rate, go ahead.
The tools that they have there, are those mainly mechanical tools or are any of them robotic, electric?
They're giant wrenches, and Some are electric, almost all are electric. It turned out in the early spacewalks, the astronauts tried to use mechanical tools, big wrenches, and they found that they got so exhausted just trying to exert force with these wrenches without being able to brace their body against something. They'd try the wrench and their body would go the opposite way of the wrench wouldn't turn. And so they use electric they look kind of like home electric drills that can unbolt things like this camera. There is no good camera angle to see them unhooking the camera, but you do see much of the body of astronaut Rich Clifford there in the foreground of your screen, and directly on the other side of his chest is this camera. He and Linda Godwin working together to get it off. They'll detach it mechanically first with these tools. It's bolted on. They'll undo the bolts. It will float free except for one wire to take the signal back into the space station and another wire to provide electricity. They've already cut the electricity at the fuse box. And what they'll do is cut the two wires, and then they'll just physically woman-handle the camera back down into the cargo bay of the shuttle, and it'll come back home on the inside of the space shuttle. So,
what have the astronauts been doing in the last few days together with the Mir residents? They've been, the shuttle brought up tons of stuff for the cosmonauts and Shannon Lucid aboard Mir, and they've been acting like moving workers, moving men and women, taking just huge loads of material from the shuttle to Mir. The Mir has a series of pieces of equipment on it that have worn out after 10 years in space. There's a machine called a gyrodyne, which is sort of like a gyroscope, keeps you on course. One of Mir's 3 gyrodynes was broken, and so the shuttle crew brought up a new one and took the old one out, and it's now back stored in the SpaceHab module back in the back of the cargo bay, which is being used as a gigantic broom closet for the astronauts and cosmonauts this trip to store things. And the only things left for the Atlantis crew to give to the Mir crew are some more bags of water.
Houston on airground 2.
Just a second there.
Steve 9.
Pretty loose right now.
It's one of the first times we've heard from Mission Control talking directly to the spacewalkers. And they've asked the spacewalkers to be quiet for a minute so that they can hear this message from Houston. And
To the knob shaft.
The handle hasn't come off yet. Rich, if you could put your hand down here on the end, I'll try to pull it out.
2 astronauts are talking to each other out there about giving each other some help.
I'm going to stop here and put this in my workstation caddy.
You raised an interesting point here a moment ago about Mir having been in space for 10 years. How tough is it for a space station to be in space, especially if we think about the International Space Station everybody is working on? How hard on wear and tear is there?
Well, there's a good bit, and when improvements are made, there's no way really to build in improvements unless you've made a lot of preparation on the ground for removing an outdated module of something and plugging another one in. That's, well, the guys in Houston
number 8
are having a hard time getting through. The 2 spacewalkers are monopolizing the airwaves as I am on your broadcast, for which I apologize.
No, we love it.
Yeah, but anyway, while this is going on, you have to realize the folks at Mission Control have to be talking to the commander of the space shuttle about corrections in his, environmental systems on board, or the directional system that's keeping them in orbit. Back to your question about how do you keep one up there that long? If you haven't planned it absolutely perfectly, and if you can't see into the future, when you add things, you have to do it in a way that is not very pretty. And the astronauts got a complete video tour of Mir the other day, which we were able to share with our viewers, and it showed this place that looks sort of like a school bus with everybody's book bag and backpack just kind of piled in the middle of the school bus. It looked just extraordinarily cramped to get around in, and it was just packed so tightly with things. And the reason for that is that every time they've added an improvement, they haven't been able to pack it neatly in the walls behind wall panels. It's just sort of out there on the floor. So the Mir is messy, and they're trying to make the International Space Station less messy by, first of all, designing in all the improvements that have been added to Mir before the thing gets off the ground, and then making allowances for improvements that could go sort of out of sight and be a little neater. The Space Shuttle is very neat looking when you walk around in it. Mir is very unneat when you walk around in it, but as everybody points out in both space programs, the shuttle gets to come home and get cleaned out.
Speaking of cleaning out, you live on the space station Mir. What do you do with the garbage?
It comes home on the shuttle this trip. There are a lot of garbage bags coming into the space shuttle, dirty clothes. Shannon Lucid was talking about clothes that she'll be wearing aboard Mir, and somebody asked if there's I think facetiously, is there a washing machine? And there isn't. You wear your clothes till you can't stand them anymore, and then you put them in a plastic bag and shove them in the back and wait for a supply ship to come so that you can take all these plastic bags back down to Earth. They're environmentally sensitive. They're not going to just push this stuff out into space. That wouldn't be a good thing. The camera's loose. You can see it now in Linda Godwin's hands. It's no longer where it was on the side of of that docking adapter, the big red tunnel, and you can see one of Godwin's space tools sort of flipping around in weightlessness. I think she just grabbed it with her right hand, and the astronauts will now probably hook a tether wire to that camera if they haven't done it already, so that it doesn't float off into space. The reason they're bringing it home is it's real expensive, and there's a way they can use it for something else. If they can get it back home, they wouldn't want to disconnect it and have it leave.
How long has it been out there?
It's since the docking adapter went up. It was attached to the docking module at the factory long before it was put on board the shuttle, but it's been there for not 6 months maybe, and it'll be coming home on this weekend or early next week when the shuttle returns. The shuttle is scheduled to come back to Earth on Sunday about 12 or 1300 GMT, and as we usually do, we'll be here to watch it land as well as leave. And the spacewalk, by the way, is just over an hour along, 5 more hours of this to go. And NASA promises we'll have good pictures of this for about another 8 or 9 minutes, and then they won't be able to provide us live pictures for about 45 minutes, so we'll take a little break in our live coverage coming up after the top of the hour. But you can see they continue to be at work. And it's interesting, you can, because of the sensitivity of the microphones in the spacesuits, you can hear astronaut Rich Clifford when he breathes. Here,
is this the highlight of their trip? Is this the most difficult
for these
event
two? These two? For these two, absolutely. Yeah, they've been doing science experiments. They've been working in the glove box. They've been growing crystals back on the shuttle. But this is it. I mean, as the shuttle, you notice the shuttle's back in darkness. It's flown over Europe and Asia. It is now back probably over the Pacific now. I'll be able to tell you more precisely maybe in a minute or two. They get to watch the sunrise from a position nobody else has ever. I mean, there are maybe 24 people in the history of humankind that have been able to see a sunrise the way they get to see one. And it's just looking out into space is the big kick for these folks. But of course, they also need to be able to prove that they can do this work that they're being paid these high NASA salaries for.
Have the Americans done spacewalks outside of space stations before?
Not, I'm going to be corrected if I'm wrong on this, Bettina. The United States had a space station once back 20 years ago called Skylab, and I just don't remember if they did spacewalks, so I'm not gonna get viewer phone calls. I'm sure viewers will fax us with the answer to that question. They haven't. That would have been the only opportunity that American people had. I'm certainly, you know, during the Gemini days in the Gemini program, Buzz Aldrin, one of the Apollo astronauts who was also in Gemini, did spacewalks outside the Gemini capsule and outside the Apollo capsule, I believe. And so, yeah, they've done spacewalks, but not outside something as huge as a space station. And I predict for you, before we end our coverage, 4.5, 5 hours from now, you'll be able to see the immensity of the Mir space station that is just arrayed up above these two, you know, sort of mouse-like looking creatures, these astronauts who are out there hard at work on one tiny part of it.
Are the American and the Russian space centers communicating during this trip the whole time?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a Russian speaker in NASA's mission control, in fact, Sergei Krikalev, who we've talked to before on this front. Hey, look, that's that picture I was telling you about. That's not how big the Mir is, but that's a lot better view to show you how small the two astronauts are. Those white specks in the middle of your screen are compared to just the bottom part of Mir. At any rate, the spacewalk will continue for another 4 hours, 45 minutes, maybe. Our coverage will continue as long as they're out there and we have good pictures.
Yes, so please stay with us. That's all for this edition of World News. I'm Bettina Lüscher together with John Holloman. Thanks for being here. It's always a pleasure. Please stay tuned to CNN International for more live coverage of U.S. astronauts' spacewalk outside Space Station Mir.
Schwerelos. Die amerikanischen Astronauten Linda Godwin und Rich Clifford haben die Raumfähre Atlantis zu einem 6-stündigen Weltraumausflug verlassen. Die Astronauten sind durch lange Sicherheitsleinen mit ihrer Raumfähre verbunden. Sollten die Seile reißen, können sie sich durch die Rakete auf dem Rücken zu Atlantis zurückmanövrieren. Zum ersten Mal stiegen die US-Raumfahrer aus einer Fähre, die fest an der russischen Raumstation Mir angedockt hat.
Im Spaziergang im All haben die beiden US-Astronauten Goodwin und Clifford heute Weltraumgeschichte geschrieben. Es war das erste Mal, dass Experimente gemacht wurden, während das US-Shuttle Atlantis noch an der russischen Station Mir angedockt war. Die beiden Amerikaner untersuchten die Außenhülle der Mir und testeten Werkzeuge, die extra für das Weltraumrendezvous entwickelt worden waren. Beide waren mit speziellen Raketenrucksäcken ausgerüstet, die sie zur Mir zurückgebracht hätten, wenn die Verbindungskabel gerissen wären.
The Atlantis crew members Linda Godwin and Rich Clifford floated between the Atlantis and the attached Russian Mir space station. They used the Mir's docking apparatus to set up a few experiments. These are designed to keep an eye on the effect of the space junk that floats nearby and will rattle into the big orange docker. Another shuttle will come back and retrieve these experiments in some 18 months. That's World News from Washington for a Wednesday. I'm Reed Collins. Larry King live next for Europe, other countries, and other regions. See more World News. Now for everybody, weather and Flip Spiceland.
They successfully completed a number of experiments designed to pave the way for the construction of a new international space station next year. Bruce Whitehead describes a day's work in space.
It may look like a scene from the American hit movie Toy Story, but its purpose has little to do with cyberspace. This is how astronauts practice their spacewalks. And this is how their day begins when they do it for real.
Another sunrise, another sunset.
After breakfast, the spacemen and women assemble for a news conference to let Earthlings know what they're up to.
Tomorrow, and that's when Linda and Rich, you see here in the front, are going to make a historic spacewalk. It'll be the first time people have gone out the door from a U.S. shuttle while attached to a space station, and in this case, the Mir space station.
Is the trunnion device, the grapple fixture.
Then it's all systems go for the running repairs and instrument adjustments that make up the astronauts' day. Thin tethers attach the spacewalkers to the mother ship. But just in case one snaps, as happened on a recent mission with one experiment, they've a jetpack which will guide them home to Atlantis.
All it is an obstruction.
Rich Clifford, floating 250 miles above the Earth, calmly unbolting a camera used to monitor docking.
Right behind her.
His crewmate Linda Godwin's comments on floating weightless in space. It's pretty neat out here. Then the pair began deploying a series of experiments designed to assess how well Mir stands up to the constant hurricane of tiny dust particles and larger debris that smashes into the station. Information that'll be crucial to the building of an international space station next year. But even highly trained astronauts can get stuck sometimes.
It's quite mind-boggling, isn't it?
During the nearly 6-hour spacewalk, astronauts Linda Godwin and Rich Clifford accomplished nearly all their goals. First, they detached a camera from the side of the red docking tunnel, a camera that was used to assist in attaching the tunnel to Mir. That camera is going back to Earth to be used for something else. Then they attached 4 suitcase-sized experiment cases to the side of the tunnel, cases that, when they're opened, expose possible space station construction material to the elements in space. The plan to make sure those materials can withstand long periods in the environment of space. Finally, the cases were opened, and the crew spent its last hour putting tools away and preparing to go back inside for the rest of the mission. A major goal of this mission is to increase cooperation between Russian cosmonauts and U.S. astronauts. And during the entire spacewalk, the Russians were making movies of the Atlantis crew in the cargo bay. These are very unusual pictures from the perspective of the Russians up to 100 feet above. Veteran spacewalking astronaut Jerry Ross says it couldn't have gone more smoothly.
The physical exercise that you get from being in a suit and operating outside for many hours is a really good exercise, and it gives you a physical high as well as the emotional high you have from coming in after a very exciting and successful spacewalk.
Now that they've closed the hatch behind them, the astronauts get back to their more regular duties, conducting science experiments and watching the world go by from a vantage point 240 miles above the planet. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
Now the EVA activities. Think, Linda?
Well, Ron is helping Rich and I get suited up here in the airlock. We're getting pretty close to getting to our pre-breathe timeline, and following that, we get ready to go out the hatch. We had a lot of room inside because we had an airlock and a docking adapter, and came out of the hatch on the docking adapter. Our first job was to install some clamps on the handrails to deploy the experiment packages later, and then our task was to move to a camera to remove it on the docking module, and this was used on STS-74 when they docked with Mir, and then when they left the docking module there, the camera was left there also. So one of our tasks was to remove it and bring it back to Earth. And I took some of the smaller items back, and here you see Rich. He's translating with the camera itself, which is rather large, and he was being very careful of that as he shepherded it back to the tunnel adapter, where he stowed it temporarily back inside till we were finished with the EVA.
Here you see Linda and myself removing one of the 4 MEEP containers for installation onto some clamps on the docking module. We tested out some new tools and equipment for use on the ultimate International Space Station, the rigid tether and the multiple-use tether, which we use to transport the MEEPs to their work site and install them into the clamps. Here you're going to see one of those activities. And then one of the funnest things that Linda and I had to do were the deployment of the MEEPs, and you're going to see that here. It's so much easier to do up there. You just give it a little flick and it flies around. And I'm sure that this is real time instead of sped up. Yeah. But tremendously finely designed hardware that worked well in flight, and we can learn a lot from the folks at Langley and our own engineering directorate here that helped design the hardware for this particular EVA. It all worked well, and we deployed, this one here is MEEP number 4, I believe. The MEEP experiments are orbital debris sensors and passive samplers.
Well, this is my cue for my second come in. After really a whirlwind and flurry of activity over several days, we were all very sad to get ready to depart the Mir space station. This is the farewell ceremony, and I think I can speak for the rest of the crew. Certainly for me, it was the most emotion-filled moment that I'd had in orbit in 2 missions. Of course, saying goodbye to Shannon, there's Chile giving her a hug and wishing her well for her long stay up there until STS-79 goes back to pick her up.
With the final handshake and goodbye, the hatch linking the Atlantis and Mir was closed. U.S. astronaut Shannon Lucid remained behind. She'll work with her 2 Russian crewmates aboard the Mir over the next 5 months. Sunday's foggy forecast in Florida prompted NASA to bring home the shuttle 1 day early. Atlantis is now scheduled to land at the Florida Kennedy Space Center on Saturday.
Einen Namen hat sie schon. Alpha soll die internationale Raumstation heißen, und an Bord wird sich das Forschungslabor Columbus befinden. Gebaut wird es von der deutschen DASA. Der Vertrag wurde heute in Bremen unterzeichnet. Die DASA hat damit die Systemführung für den europäischen Beitrag an der Station Alpha, die Anfang des nächsten Jahrtausends ihre Arbeit im All aufnehmen soll. Soweit die Pläne. Nun zur aktuellen Realität. Dass über uns im All der russischen Weltraumstation Mir ein wechselnder Besetzung internationale Truppe kreist, daran haben wir uns gewöhnt. Auch daran, dass der Shuttle-Service der amerikanischen Raumfähre Atlantis zum Weltraumlaboratorium jetzt schon zum 3. Mal relativ problemlos funktioniert hat. Heute legte die Atlantis wieder ab. Zurück blieb bei den beiden russischen Kosmonauten eine Frau, die erste Amerikanerin, die im Mir-Projekt arbeitet. Es ist Shannon Lucid, eine Astronautin mit sehr viel Weltraumerfahrung und überhaupt eine bemerkenswerte Frau. Elmar Thewissen stellt sie vor.
So ein Glück. Sie mögen sich so sehr, dass Shannon Lucid das Wichtigste gleich mitgebracht hat. In dem kleinen braunen Sack da ist ihr russischer Raumanzug, den sie im Notfall in der Sojus-Kapsel braucht und der sie deshalb zu einem echten Mitglied der Mir-Besatzung macht. Wie man hineinspringt oder schwebt, das hat die 53-Jährige in Star City, dem russischen Weltraumzentrum, geübt. Lucid ist eine Frau, die eigentlich immer auf dem Boden der Tatsachen gestanden hat, auch wenn sie ab und zu mal abhebt, um in die unendlichen Weiten des Raumes zu starten. Geboren in Shanghai, China, aufgewachsen in Oklahoma. Und als kleines Mädchen träumte sie vom Leben als Pionier im Wilden Westen. Nun ist sie Forscherin im wilden Weltall. Das war damals im 4. oder 5. Schuljahr, sagt sie. Da habe ich mir überlegt, ich könnte ja eigentlich erwachsen werden und den Weltraum erkunden. Die Leute dachten, ich sei verrückt, denn damals gab es ja noch keine Raumfahrt. Ziemlich erstaunlich, dass es doch geklappt hat. Und wie es geklappt hat, 4-mal seit 1985 war Lucid mit dem Space Shuttle auf Entdeckungsfahrt. Dabei hat die Biochemikerin vor allem über die Auswirkungen der Schwerelosigkeit auf den menschlichen Körper geforscht. Und sie schickte auch den Satellit Galileo mit auf die Reise, NASAs Guckloch in fremde Welten. Von denen träumt sie, wenn sie, wie sie selbst sagt, nicht gerade ans Essen denkt. Natürlich wäre es am Frühstückstisch mit ihren 3 Kindern gemütlicher, aber die sind aus dem Gröbsten raus, alle über 20 Jahre. Und so sind ihre Kollegen eigentlich sowas wie Familie geworden. Auch Juri der Fröhliche und Juri der Schweigsame. So nennt Lucid ihre beiden Freunde aus Russland. Und wenn den dreien partout kein Gesprächsthema mehr einfällt, dann will Lucid im Cyberspace mit ihrer Familie schwatzen per Computer. Ich habe meiner Familie ernste Folgen angedroht, wenn sie nicht täglich E-Mail an mich schickt. Die bekomme ich dann über das russische Telefonsystem. Aber die meiste Zeit wird sowieso geforscht für spätere Planetenreisen. Die Amerikaner wollen künftig ständig jemanden im All haben. Die erste Frau, so lästerte diese Woche jemand von der russischen Raumfahrtbehörde, könne ja mal die veraltete Mir-Station putzen. Hier Lucids Antwort. Sowas lässt mich kalt. Wir werden hier zu dritt sauber machen, kündigt sie an. Wir machen keinen Unterschied nach Mann, Frau oder Herkunftsland hier an Bord der Weltraumstation. Dann könnte die internationale Raumbasis Alpha ja kommen, doch die Astronauten trainieren dafür vielleicht vergeblich. Denn seit gestern weigert sich die russische Regierung, ihren Anteil zu bezahlen. Aber hier oben denkt man wohl nicht an den schnöden Mammon. Artig tauschten die beiden Crews letzte Nacht noch Geschenke aus und seitdem schwebt Shannon Lucid ihrem Rekord entgegen. 150 Tage Weltall.
On undock day, again, we're very busy on that day, similarly to the docking day. We prepared configuration-wise this orbiter and Mir complex to separate. And very shortly here we'll see that separation sequence and leading into the fly-around. This is Chili waving goodbye to his buddies over there, the Mir-21 crew, including Shannon. The Russians were very kind to ship down this video, which then came from soup to MCC and enabled us to put it in our crew movie in a very timely fashion. Separation here, again sped up. We were as I mentioned before, very sad to leave and wished we could have stayed longer and been up there with our friends. The initial separation burn, a couple of low Z pulses out to get going and establish the initial opening rate. And as we continued to fly out, we assumed a range of 450 to 550 feet targeted to conduct this fly around of the Mir, which I was privileged to fly, and it's been, for me, one of the most professionally rewarding things I've ever done. But at the same time, in the background of my mind, also a very emotionally charged event. This video will share some of what we saw from on orbit, which was just absolutely outstanding and flabbergasting, really, to see this orbiting complex out our windows, and here in this particular case to see video shot from the Mir of America's greatest technology achievement ever, a space shuttle in orbit doing what it does best. This is a view of the Mir space station over the Great Barrier Reef. Right after we gave the KU antenna to COM to send TV down, this is the first picture that came down to the ground. And this particular view is as the Mir passes through the horizon, approaching the terminator, and no, it is not a model. We saw it with our own eyes, and that's what it was, and it was outstandingly beautiful with the backlit view, and something that I will always treasure in my mind.
The U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis and Russia's Mir space station separated after 5 days of orbiting the Earth together. Atlantis is scheduled to return to Earth on Saturday. The crew left behind an American astronaut who will spend 5 months aboard Mir.
Raumfähre Atlantis auf dem Rückflug zur Erde. In der Nacht dockte sie problemlos von der russischen Raumstation Mir ab. Atlantis bringt Proben von wissenschaftlichen Experimenten für amerikanische, russische und europäische Forscher zur Erde mit. Die US-Astronautin Lucid bleibt an Bord der Mir zurück. Zusammen mit 2 russischen Kollegen wird sie 4,5 Monate im All verbringen, um die Auswirkungen der Schwerelosigkeit auf Menschen zu testen.
Atlantis ist auf dem Rückweg zur Erde. Ohne Probleme hat sie sich von der russischen Raumstation Mir abgekoppelt. Morgen Mittag werden die Astronauten in Cape Canaveral erwartet. Allerdings ohne ihre Kollegin Shannon Lucid. Sie wird die nächsten 4,5 Monate an Bord der Mir verbringen.
As the shuttle and Mir flew 240 miles above Russia, passing from darkness to light, the two ships ended their 5 days together. The shuttle moving away from Mir slowly at first and flying around the Russian ship in a circle that brought Atlantis from its position directly underneath Mir to a position 600 feet above the Russian space station. As the minutes ticked away, the shuttle got further and further away until less than an hour after undocking, as the sun set over South America, Mir became a series of flashing lights and finally faded from view. The end of an emotional 24 hours for both crews.
This is kind of a bittersweet moment for us, and one also filled with a lot of satisfaction. We've had a wonderful time on the Mir Atlantis complex.
It was a tearful goodbye for Atlantis astronauts and Mir cosmonauts as they ended their joint mission in space. Shuttle Commander Kevin Chilton choked up as he conducted the official departure ceremony aboard Mir.
We know we'll see Shannon again when she comes back on STS-79, but there's a big ocean between Russia and America, and we're not so confident, or sure, or certain, I should say, that we'll ever see our two friends, Yuri and Yuri, again. In person.
The Russian cosmonauts were also emotional during the ceremony.
We will observe each other. Only through the portholes. They'll be looking at us, we'll be looking at them.
The astronauts are coming home ahead of schedule. Mission managers announced that concern about the leaking auxiliary power unit on Atlantis and the weather forecast for Florida convinced them to bring the shuttle home Saturday rather than Sunday.
The weather forecasts at Kennedy are go right now for a Saturday landing. They are no-go for a Sunday landing and no-go for a Monday landing. So the best opportunity to land at Kennedy is to go ahead and land early and go ahead and land one day early on Saturday.
The power unit, one of 3 used to steer the shuttle, will be turned on for landing, but managers have decided not to count on it. That means the shuttle will need calmer winds for landing, and those winds are forecast for the Kennedy Space Center Saturday. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
Die amerikanische Raumfähre Atlantis hat sich von der russischen Raumstation Mir gelöst und den Rückweg zur Erde angetreten. Hauptaufgabe der Shuttle-Mission war es, die Amerikanerin Shannon Lucid zu Mir zu bringen. Die Astronautin wird bis August im All bleiben, um die Auswirkung von Schwerelosigkeit auf den Menschen zu testen. Die Raumfähre Atlantis soll morgen in Florida landen.
Move on to North America. A storm system's moving out of the Rocky Mountains into the Plain States. It will fill the mid-sections of the U.S. with rainfall. You get up into Canada, air cold enough, it'll be in the form of snow.
The moment of parting came a day early. NASA wanted the shuttle back before bad weather and a hydraulic leak threatened its landing. So with one final wave, the Americans moved gently away. For 5 days, the shuttle and space station Mir had been locked together 250 miles above the Earth, embracing each other's life support systems in the vast empty void that is space. There had been more embraces earlier when it was time to part. For the Americans, saying goodbye was harder. They were leaving behind one of their crew, 53-year-old biochemist Shannon Lucid, for a 5-month stay on board Mir. More time in space than any other American.
We're going to miss them. You know, we know we'll see Shannon again when she comes back on STS-79, but there's a big ocean between Russia and America, and we're not so confident or certain, I should say, that we'll ever see our two friends, Yuri and Yuri, again.
The shuttle will return to Mir in August to pick up Shannon. This mission marks what is expected to be the start of a permanent presence in space for the United States. Robin White, ITN.
Here's a look across North America. Frontal systems of split flow headed towards the east. A weak weather system may produce some light moisture across the central west coast of the U.S. In Los Angeles, look for partly cloudy skies and 19 degrees.
Atlantis is scheduled to arrive at the Kennedy Space Center Saturday morning, Florida time. If weather interferes with the landing, the shuttle may be diverted to Edwards Air Force Base in California. CNN International will bring you live coverage of the landing of the Shuttle Atlantis. It's now scheduled for 13:57 Berlin time.
Space Shuttle Atlantis is scheduled to return to Earth shortly, but an early morning fog has forced the space agency NASA to scrub the first landing attempt and try 90 minutes later at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The craft was on an 8-day docking mission with the Russian space station Mir. CNN's John Holloman looks back at the cooperation between Americans and Russians in space.
Unless you really care about the space program, pictures like these might not mean very much to you. A Russian space station, built back when the Soviet Union was the arch enemy of the United States, as seen from the U.S. space shuttle. And a picture of astronauts waving to the Russians from windows on the roof of the shuttle. From the very beginning, in the 1950s, the Americans and the Soviets were enemies in space, running the space race to prove who could launch the heaviest payloads, translate that powerful warheads, into the skies over the country of the other. But over the years, something changed. The Soviets, faced with rising costs of defending against multiple warhead U.S. missiles, and the U.S. with similar escalating costs, decided to stop racing and start working together. Since that decision, Americans have flown to Mir, Russian for peace, 4 times. They've hooked up 3 times, and as of now, there will be an American living on board Mir for the entire foreseeable future. Consider this. The commander of Mir, who gave big bear hugs to the commander of Atlantis, was trained to fly military jets against the United States. And the same could be said for the shuttle commander and pilot. While the shuttle in Mir flew over Bosnia, the Middle East, and other world hotspots, the 2 crews were sitting down to dinner together. And in science laboratories aboard both ships, major scientific discoveries are being made, from contact lenses that you can wear for months at a time, to major advances in fighting disease, from diabetes to AIDS. Things are happening in space. And the future, if nothing changes and the governments down below, will be even more promising. The Russians and Americans, Europeans, Japanese, and Canadians are building huge pieces of space hardware in factories which once turned out weapons of war. It's a program designed to force the world's former enemies into friendship, which has to last well into the next century. Something to think about when the pretty pictures from space fill up your TV screen. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
And CNN International will bring you live coverage of the shuttle landing in little more than 3 hours from now.
Atlantis ist auf dem Weg zurück zur Erde. Sie soll einen Tag früher als geplant auf dem Kennedy-Weltraumbahnhof in Florida landen. Als Gründe für die Änderung werden Probleme mit der Hydraulik der Raumfähre und das für morgen erwartete schlechte Wetter genannt. Die Atlantis hatte sich gestern von der russischen Raumstation Mir gelöst.
Shuttle Atlantis will stay in orbit one extra day. NASA has just announced that dense fog and clouds have postponed the landing that was scheduled for Saturday. Atlantis successfully docked with the Russian Space Center Mir and left behind one U.S. astronaut. The shuttle must return to Earth quickly because of a leak in the hydraulics system.
Switch that activates a sensor to feed that information to the onboard general purpose computers resulted in a no open indication, and the payload bay door opening process was temporarily halted. Flight Director Jeff Bantle conferred with his team of engineers here in the Mission Control Center and the Mechanical Systems Officer in particular, who determined that the doors were just fine and that the latches had in fact opened. So carefully and cautiously the procedure was reinitiated to open the doors, and the payload bay doors are now open. Again, no problem at all with the payload bay doors themselves or the latches associated with those doors, simply what is believed to be a micro switch problem that failed to produce a latch open indication to the onboard computers for Atlantis' astronauts. With that out of the way, the astronauts are now pressing ahead with the rest of their deorbit preparation back-out procedures, their landing opportunities having been waived off for the day.
So, what that all means, in case you weren't able to get it completely, is that the astronauts are back on schedule to do a landing. The first opportunity for landing would be 1200 GMT tomorrow at the Kennedy Space Center, but the weather there is expected to still be unacceptable tomorrow. The most likely place that the astronauts will land will be Edwards Air Force Base in California, where a landing team is setting up shop as we speak to be prepared to do the procedures you have to do to make the shuttle safe after it lands anywhere back here on Earth. But the news is good. After being fairly tense for about an hour with this problem getting the payload bay doors open, they have to be open if the astronauts are going to stay in space for an extended period of time, because their being open helps the heating and cooling system on the shuttle with a couple of radiators that are out here that do a lot of things, including produce water for the astronauts to drink. They'd be out of water in about 4 hours if they hadn't been able to get the doors open. But as you just heard, the doors are open again. And one thing that is for sure is when the shuttle lands, whether it's tomorrow or a little bit later, the micro switches which told the computer the bad information will be gone over with a fine-tooth comb. That concludes our live breaking news coverage. Back to Larry King with House Speaker Newt Gingrich and some animals entertaining here on CNN International.
This has been CNN International Breaking News.
North American weather, we have an area of low pressure that is moving across the Midwest in the U.S., and that is producing some showers, some thunderstorms across the southeast U.S. System moving through central Canada is going to produce some snow as it moves slowly off towards the east, with high pressure and fair weather in the forecast for the northeastern U.S. and for much of Mexico. Sunday morning across North America, low pressure will continue to produce showers, thunderstorms in the southeastern U.S. As you get farther to the north in the colder air through parts of Canada, some of that in the form of snow. Sunshine, though, in Winnipeg, chance for thunderstorms in the southeast U.S.
The concern involved the shuttle's cargo bay doors. After poor weather forced a delay in Saturday's scheduled landing, astronauts went to open the doors to keep the shuttle cool. At first, some technical instruments suggested the doors' latches would not open. But after astronaut Linda Godwin checked it out, that appeared not to be the case. The situation was resolved. Meanwhile, the shuttle is still flying high above Earth and plans to return on Sunday.
How are the details when we return? The crew of the Space Shuttle Atlantis will try again Sunday to come back to Earth. Bad weather forced the U.S. Space Agency NASA to cancel Saturday's planned landing in Florida, but that wasn't the only problem. A little while later, astronauts discovered the cargo doors had frozen shut. And with heat building up inside the shuttle,
It looked as if Atlantis would have to make an emergency landing in California. NASA was only 10 minutes away from ordering Atlantis home when the crew managed to solve the problem. Clouds on the horizon for the U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis. We'll have the details when we return. Space Shuttle Atlantis will try again Sunday to come back to Earth. Bad weather forced the U.S. Space Agency, NASA, to cancel Saturday's planned landing in Florida. But that wasn't the only problem. A little while later, astronauts discovered the cargo doors had frozen shut. And with heat building up inside the shuttle, it looked as if Atlantis would have to make an emergency landing in California. NASA was only 10 minutes away from ordering Atlantis home when the crew managed to solve the problem.
Eastern United States, rain showers, snow up into Ontario and Quebec. North and western U.S., up into the western provinces, more rain and snow is expected there. Some details include some sunshine, but only a little bit. Salt Lake City. In Miami, Florida, we'll see some sun, we think.
In addition to ferrying 2 tons of water, supplies, and tools to Mir, Atlantis also delivered human cargo in the person of astronaut Shannon Lucid. She joined cosmonauts Yuri Onofrienko and Yuri Yusashev for a planned 5-month stay.
This is the first time that the Americans have a chance to start learning what it means to have a continual presence in space. And so we'll learn about that. It will also help us learn what what we need to know when we start operating the space station.
A 6-hour spacewalk was the other high point of the mission. Astronauts Linda Godwin and Rich Clifford ventured outside the huge Atlantis Mir stack to attach 4 suitcase-sized cases of experimental equipment to Mir. The space agencies hope to find out more about the effects of space debris hitting stations in long-term orbit. NASA hopes to begin construction of the International Space Station with help from the Russians by late next year. Also this week, another object in low Earth orbit was generating some stunning images. The Hubble Space Telescope captured some shots of the comet Hyakutake. The pictures suggest the comet has been around the sun before, maybe many times. If Hyakutake were a new comet, gas and dust would flow off fairly evenly. But older comets are crusty, and that often creates geysers. And that's exactly what the Hubble telescope spotted on Hyakutake. Meanwhile, someone else at NASA came up with an artist's conception of how a close encounter with a comet would look to someone who happened to be in the right spot in space. And astronomers around the world captured spectacular images from the ground, like this one from the Pearson International College Observatory in Victoria, British Columbia. Don Moffat of the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory, also in Victoria, took this one with a 135mm lens and a 2-minute exposure. His colleague, Fraser Chambers, took this shot with a 100mm lens and a 4-minute exposure. You can find more comet images on their homepage, and you can get there from our homepage, which is at CNN.com. Some observers think the comet is now splitting into 2 fragments. If they're right, that could make it even brighter.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, this is John Holloman at CNN Center, welcoming our viewers in the United States and all around the world. The Shuttle Atlantis is streaking through the skies over southern Oregon and northern California at this moment, 3 minutes away from landing at Edwards Air Force Base. 2 of the 3 auxiliary power units aboard have been turned on and are operating to help the pilot, Kevin Chilton, and Commander Rick Searfoss steer the shuttle to a landing on runway 22 at Edwards. You can see it has made its final turn to landing now. This will have the shuttle coming in basically from south to north on the runway. Final minutes of landing will be interesting since there's concern about the power units and the possible lack of a backup power unit if something happens to the 2 systems that are designed to land the ship. Commander Chilton is completing a left turn to line up with the runway right now. You can see that left turn in progress. During this mission, the shuttle crew has accomplished a lot. When it left more than 9 days ago, there were 6 crew members aboard, but the crew is now only 5. The major task of the trip to drop off astronaut Shannon Lucid aboard Russia's Mir space station, orbiting more than 240 miles above the Earth.
Runway inside Houston.
Astronaut and now cosmonaut Lucid
210 at 5 knots.
They're telling the commander what the winds are like on the runway, only 5 knots, which is very good because the shuttle needs calm winds to land at this point. Astronaut and now cosmonaut Lucid may be in our audience for this landing coverage today. We got a call from the Russian Space Agency saying that that agency wanted to make sure CNN International was carrying the landing today, and they have the capability to broadcast it live to Mir.
Will soon be flaring up Atlantis' nose to bleed off any excess energy prior to the dropping of the landing gear by pilot Rick Searfoss.
We'll watch to see the landing gear come down. By the way, CNN will be talking with Shannon Lucid in her first interview from Mir next Wednesday. It'll happen at 9:35 Eastern Time, which is 14:35 GMT. Another major part of the mission this week was a spacewalk by astronauts Linda Godwin and Rich Clifford, who were outside Mir for about 6 hours. Payload Commander Ron Sega was in charge of managing the spacewalk and the unloading of more than 2 tons of supplies taken from the Space Hab and Atlantis' cargo bay,
flare up the nose,
and moved on to Mir. There comes the landing gear. It was something that there was some concern about earlier. Wanted to make sure that landing gear would come down. We're just seconds from touchdown right now. We'll watch the last couple of seconds before landing. You can see the sun coming up over the Mojave Desert behind the shuttle.
Main gear touchdown. Pilot Rick Searfoss now deploying the drag chute. Nose gear touchdown. Atlantis now rolling out on runway 22 at Edwards Air Force Base to wrap up a 3.8 million-mile mission to establish a permanent U.S. presence in space.
As Atlantis touches down, it has been around the world 144 times. It has traveled 3.8 million miles, most of that in space, and has been away from this planet for 9 days, 5 hours, 15 minutes, and 37 seconds. Doesn't look too much the worse for wear. NASA plans its next shuttle mission to lift off on May the 17th. That will be Shuttle Endeavour, which will go up for 9 days. We'll listen to
Welcome back, Atlantis. Congratulations on successfully delivering Shannon and also completing the first approach and landing from the new Mission Control Center.
It feels good to be home, Bill, and we'll appreciate all of your help. I'd hate to be in Phil Ingloff's shoes. It's going to be tough to pick the person to hang the plaque on this mission. Great work.
Houston, Atlantis, APU number 3 is coming off.
All right, the astronauts are down safe and sound. CNN will continue its coverage of Shannon Lucid's mission aboard Mir for the 5 months she's there. That ends our coverage of the landing of Space Shuttle Atlantis, which from all we could tell was flawless. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
This has been CNN International Breaking News.
Um 15:29 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Zeit ist die amerikanische Raumfähre Atlantis mit einem Tag Verspätung sicher auf der Erde gelandet. Allerdings nicht in Florida wie ursprünglich geplant, sondern auf dem Luftwaffenstützpunkt Edwards in Kalifornien. Wegen der heftigen Stürme in Florida und eines Lecks in einem der 3 Hydrauliksysteme wollte die NASA keinerlei Risiko eingehen. Die 5 Astronauten waren 9 Tage lang im All und hatten ihre 53-jährige Kollegin Shannon Lucid zur russischen Raumstation Mir gebracht, wo sie bis August bleiben wird.
Mit einem Tag Verspätung ist die amerikanische Raumfähre Atlantis zur Erde zurückgekehrt. Das Space Shuttle setzte auf dem kalifornischen Luftwaffenstützpunkt Edwards auf. Die ursprünglich für gestern vorgesehene Landung im Raumfahrtzentrum Cape Canaveral in Florida musste wegen ungünstiger Wetterverhältnisse abgesagt werden. Nach 9 Tagen beendeten 5 der 6 amerikanischen Astronauten ihren Aufenthalt im All. Ihre Kollegin Shannon Lucid wird noch weitere 4 Monate an Bord der russischen Raumstation Mir bleiben.
Auf ihrer Mission hatte die Atlantis-Besatzung Vorräte und technische Ausrüstung zur russischen Weltraumstation Mir gebracht.
Die waren insgesamt 9 Tage im All. Höhepunkt der Reise ein Rendezvous mit der russischen Raumstation Mir.
Die Raumfähre muss mit einem Spezialtransporter vom Militärflugplatz Edwards in der kalifornischen Mojave-Wüste zum Startplatz nach Florida zurückgebracht werden. Kosten $1 Million. Im August wird die Atlantis erneut zu der russischen Raumstation Mir fliegen, um die amerikanische Astronautin Lucid wieder abzuholen.
sind die amerikanische Raumfähre Atlantis und seine 5-köpfige Besatzung aus dem All zurückgekehrt. Sie landeten am Nachmittag in Kalifornien, weil über Florida weiterhin eine dichte Wolkendecke hing. Die NASA wollte wegen eines Lecks in einem der 3 Hydrauliksysteme kein Risiko eingehen. Atlantis kam von einem Rendezvous mit der russischen Raumstation Mir. In der Station blieb die Astronautin Shannon Lucid für 4,5 Monate zurück.
Well, it's coming home time now, and Ron did a bang-up job shooting these scenes. That little camcorder that he holds, there's a self-shot on the way down, starts weighing 0 at the start of re-entry, and then it starts feeling like it weighs a ton on the way down. So he did a great job shooting this. This is out the overhead window as we're coming in through the re-entry, and you can see the plasma trail behind the orbiter there. It pulsates like that and literally lights the cockpit up with flashes as you come down. Out the front window, you just get a nice steady pink and orangish glow as you go through the maximum heating. And here we are in a roll reversal, one of 3 that we did as we lined up for our approach at Edwards Air Force Base. Rather unique long-range shot here where you can actually see the RCS jets firing in the tail of the shuttle as we decelerated through around Mach 2, approaching Edwards to help keep the nose pointed forward. And I logged a night landing on this one because officially the sun hadn't come up, but it sure was a pretty time of day to land. It was just, the xenons were on, but you really didn't need them. You could see the ground just fine, and there wasn't hardly a breath of wind in the air. It was real calm, smooth skies, and it just, you know, you knew what you were flying. The space shuttle was responding just so beautifully. It really flew marvelously and was a joy to bring in for a landing. Rick, go ahead and punched out the landing gear for us on time, and then the drag chute and the timing was just right on that, and cushioned the nose slap down as we came rolling down the runway for a stop. And I think I'll quote Andy Allen from STS-75, there's no better feeling than that call wheel stop, particularly when you know you've done your job, you've done the best you can, and now it's over and it's time to turn the vehicle over to the folks at Kennedy to get it ready to start back through the same process all over again to go up and retrieve Shannon on STS-79. If I look a little confused here at the end, I was doing a nose count and I came up 1 short during the walk around. But I was assured that was the right answer. So everybody felt terrific after the flight, and it was certainly good to get back home to family and friends and to you all back here in Houston.
STS-76 will chalk up another first in space when Rich Clifford and Linda Godwin become the first Americans to conduct a spacewalk in close proximity to the Russian station. We do have live pictures of the flight crew. Got mission specialist Linda Godwin. She'll be one of the spacewalkers on this flight. Pilot Richard Searfoss. And Commander Kevin Chilton. Chilton will be guiding the Shuttle Atlantis to a smooth docking. Mission Specialist Shannon Lucid getting ready to begin her stay on Mir. Mission Specialist Ron Saga. And Mission Specialist Rich Clifford, who's also serving as the flight engineer for the mission and will be performing the spacewalk. And the crew waving for the camera. We've got about 30 minutes remaining in this built-in hold at the T-minus 3-hour mark. T-minus 3 hours in holding. This is a planned built-in hold, all continuing to go well as we count down to the launch of STS-76 with the Space Shuttle Atlantis. This is Shuttle Launch Control. This is Shuttle Launch Control at T-minus 3 hours in holding. We're standing by to get live coverage of the STS-76 astronauts as they get into their launch and entry suits. And we do have coverage. We've got Commander Kevin Chilton making his third flight today. Just completed the weather briefing with flight directors in Houston and the weather coordinators there. Going through the traditional suit up, being assisted with the bulky suit. Chilton will be the third, will dock with the Russian space station, the third to do that. Got pilot Richard Sirfos making his second flight. He's known as the rendezvous expert and will be responsible for the undocking of the Mir station and the subsequent fly around. Sirfos will be assisting Chilton at the flight controls in the crew cabin of Atlantis. Mission Specialist Ron Sega, he's the payload commander for this mission, making his second flight. He's very familiar with the United States-Russian cooperative space effort, having spent several months in Russia serving as NASA's operations director at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, just outside of Moscow. Across the room, the rest of the crew members are getting assisted with equipment they'll be taking aboard. Mission Specialist Shannon Lucid. She's got flying for the fifth time today. It's the first American woman to be launched aboard the Mir station. She'll be staying aboard the Mir for 4.5 months. As soon as she arrives on the Mir station, she will become part of that team. She'll be staying on Mir for about 143 days until August, conducting long-duration space research. Mission Specialist Rich Clifford, he's also serving as the flight engineer and will be one of the crew members to make a spacewalk. The spacewalk will occur on flight day 6. He's also going to be responsible for the space vision system and will be helping transfer supplies and equipment over to the Mir station. Also, he'll be assisting the commander and pilot with ascent and reentry checklists and in monitoring vehicle systems as the flight engineer. Mission Specialist Linda Godwin, she's making her third flight today. She's going to join Rich Clifford in the spacewalk on flight day 6, where they'll be attaching 4 experiments to the Mir docking module. She'll also be involved in the unique KidSat payload and the SAR-X experiment, flying again with him, involving the amateur radio operation from the shuttle. And also she'll be involved with the biorack experiments in the Space Hab. Commander Kevin Chilton ready to go this morning. And here we have the crew coming out. A profile test of the orbiter aero surfaces has started. The flight control surfaces are being moved through a pre-programmed pattern to verify they are ready for launch. Next, the main engines will be gimbaled and positioned for launch.
OTC, clear caution and warning memory, verify no unexpected errors.
That's it.
The gaseous oxygen vent hood is being retracted away from the top of the external tank. Coming up on...
Sorry, PLT.
Caution warning memory clear is complete, no unexpected errors.
Copy that, then. Flight crew, OTC, close and lock your visors and initiate O2 flow. And it's just about time for the Spirit of 76 to wake up the space show, so have a great flight.
GLS is go for...
We'll put that in work. Thank you very much.
GLS go for ET, LH2, press position.
Six-member crew is about to embark on the first day of the 9-day flight, beginning of Shannon Lucid's 4.5-month stay aboard the Mir space station. Got a 6-hour spacewalk. This marks the third flight of the shuttle to the Mir link-up. From now through 1998, there will be an American astronaut aboard the Mir space station.
Contact. Okay, just looking the person.
1 minute.
Less than 1 minute away now from the launch of Atlantis. Atlantis will be launched on a northerly trajectory, inclined 51.6 degrees to the equator. T-minus 40 seconds. This marks the 13th night launch in the history of the shuttle program.
GLS go for auto sequence start.
Atlantis' onboard computers have control of vehicle functions. T-minus 20 seconds. Thousands of gallons of water will be dumped on the launch platform to help absorb the shock of the 7 million pounds of thrust. 9. We have a go for engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on the third Shuttle Mir docking flight.
Roll programming. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Mission Control sees a good maneuver placing Atlantis on the proper heading. Pretty good engine. Engines are throttling back now, helping to ease the buildup of aerodynamic loads on the vehicle as Atlantis continues to accelerate rapidly through the dense lower altitudes, traveling now over 650 miles per hour. Time 48 seconds. All systems are performing well. Atlantis is now easing through the period of maximum dynamic pressure. And the engines are throttling back up.
Atlantis, go at throttle up. Go at throttle up.
All engines are now running at full throttle. All systems are performing well. Altitude is now 62,000 feet. Atlantis is traveling over 1,000 miles per hour. Atlantis continues to climb at a relatively steep angle at this point, relying heavily on the solid rocket boosters to triple its rate of speed over the next 60 seconds. Delivering a combined 6.5 million pounds of thrust, the boosters will burn out and separate at 2 minutes 6 seconds. Time now 1 minute 52 seconds. Solid rocket booster chamber pressure is beginning to tail off, signaling the burnout of the twin boosters. Mission Control sees a good separation. Atlantis is now flying free, powered by its own main engines. Second stage guidance is now in effect. Altitude now 178,000 feet. Downrange distance 38 miles.
Atlantis, performance nominal.
Atlantis, 2-engine tail.
With 3 engines burning at 104% rated thrusts, the boosters have done their job as designed, the main engines as well, and Atlantis can now cross the Atlantic with only 2 engines should one fail. Again, all engines are performing well. Altitude is now 230,000 feet, downrange distance 58 nautical miles. Atlantis is traveling over 3,200 miles per hour. At 3 minutes 5 seconds, Atlantis' flight path is already beginning to level out a bit, lightening its load as propellant burns off and continuing its rapid acceleration. All systems are continuing to perform very well. Time now 3 minutes 19 seconds.
Let's go for auto sequence start. 25. 20. 15. 10. Let's go for main engine start.
All vents open.
T0 SRB ignition.
Liftoff confirmed.
Roll program, Houston.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Flight guidance, see a good roll.
Final flight, we got cold SRBs.
That's firm flight, about 1.5 sigma.
1.5?
Yes, sir.
Throttle up, 3 at 104. And go at throttle up.
Atlantis, go at throttle up.
Go at throttle up.
Flight guidance.
Go ahead.
Single engine press 104.
Atlantis, single engine press 104.
About 1.5 minutes to MECO at 833. Navis go.
Thank you.
Все правильно, спасибо. 8 часов включается.
Да.
Как 8 утра?
Утра, потому что в 8 вечера включили. 12 часов одна сторона записи.
Здрасте, а спать кто за вас будет?
Не понял.
А спать кто за вас будет?
Да мы только встали, ты же спать не хотел.
Не, ребята, это вы бросьте. Тут режим труда и отдыха, знаете, какой у нас.
Во сколько у нас отбой, Вась? Посмотри, пожалуйста.
Отбой у вас в 7 утра.
7 утра?
Да.
Спасибо.
Поэтому очередной сеанс. Вы уж, пожалуйста...
feet closing 0.08. Okay, I show 0.08 also. And I show 8 feet also. Good. Good comparison. Go for contact conditions for 0.1, Chili. We're a little on the slow side. We're at 0.08. 7 feet. 0.08. 8 seconds early. Was that a BDAP in, Chili? No. Okay.
Just give me data.
I show you 0.08. Closure. 0.08 closure. 6 feet, 0.08. Three seconds early. 5 feet, 0.08. Concur. I show 0.07 now, Chili.
BDAP in.
Okay, BDAP in. 4 feet. Raw data's picked it up, showing 0.11. 3 feet, 0.1. 2 seconds early. .10 on the rate. 2 feet, 0.1. Okay, hold what you got. It's sweet. 0.10, 0.10. I agree. 1 foot out the window. 1 second early. That's 6 inches. 2 inches. Contact. Contact. Capture.
Yes,
I see a
Castanio.
capture. Disarm PCT. You confirm capture? Capture is confirmed.
Yes, on 5.
PCT disarmed. Flight controller power off.
Free drift.
Okay, you're in free drift.
And we've confirmed contact and capture.
Beautiful. Unbelievable, Chili.
Great, incredible, awesome.
Sweet.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Damping's on, Rich.
Metal position base.
Flight rendezvous.
Code rendezvous.
Yes, sir. At their current RDOT, it looks like they'll get into station keeping in about 6 minutes, so that'll give them about 8 minutes of station keeping.
Okay.
Latest laser mark 290, closing at decimal 3.
290 at decimal 3. Thank you.
Flight GC.
Go ahead.
Okay, we went to manual key here, so they should be able to talk. We'll just keep manual key.
Rio flight.
Yes, flight.
We're manually keying. We'd like Moscow to try call to Mir.
Okay, stand by. Hey, Rio.
Go.
Mr. Lovioff is ready for the docking conference.
Okay.
And he's right there, and he just gave you a go, so you might respond on loop 1.
Flight GNC, PCT is disarmed and flight control powers
I
off.
have contact and capture.
Copy.
Copy contact, capture, and we confirm Mir free drift.
Copy that.
Flight Rio, free drift.
Atlantis Houston, your go for shuttle ODS hatch opening for Delta P under point 2.
Okay, we're opening the hatch.
And we have a good image of you, Chili. The two of you look great. Chili, it looks like they're welcoming you aboard.
This is a view coming down out of the airlock and taking a turn at the ODS, and now we're entering the docking adapter and heading over to the Mir space station. As you can see throughout this entire tour, it gets pretty crowded in the passageways there. Most of these bags are filled with transfer items going one way or the other. Here Ron and Yuri Yusuchev are working some of those transfers. And I couldn't resist the urge at a few spots in here to do a few aileron rolls on the way.
You always do them in the airplane. You might as well do them here.
That's right. A few less G's than we pull flying that Eagle, though, right?
Roger that.
Our transit route today on this tour starts with the docking adapter, and then on our way to the node, we're transiting through the Crystal module. Notice the ducting on the way is air ducting for the mirror's requirements. The big cable that we're going to see all the way into the base block is for the BIPSNU that sends audio through the orbiter system. We have a camera hooked up in there. Very shortly here, we're going to get to the node and take a turn. And I believe I went into Spectre next. We'll see when we get going here.
Well, finally, space vehicles are big enough to get a little lost in, huh, Rick?
Yeah, that's for sure. We'll see that graphically illustrated here in a little bit when we come back to the node. This is inside the Spectre module, which will be basically Shannon's home for the next several months. She'll be conducting her experiments in here, and this is actually quite a roomy module, and it's perhaps because it's not as full of the transfer items and other equipment as some of the other modules are. But it's starting to get that way. Had to do a U-turn down at the end here because there's no connection back. It's everything, as you know, is plugged in to the central node. You have the Spectre module, the Crystal module leading into it, and then, of course, the base block on the other side. This is transit back out of the Spectre into the node, and from here, should be going into the Command 2 module after that quick aileron roll. It's about a T-38 roll rate there, I believe.
Looked about right.
And this is the Command 2 module. Right at in the center of the field of view is one of the gyrodynes. We transferred one of those yesterday as one of our first transfer items, a new refurbished gyrodyne to the mirror, and then we're taking back an old one for refurbishment and then subsequent resupply. It points out a great capability that our shuttle has in taking down mass from Earth orbit back down to the Earth, and in applications such as space station or working with our partners on board Mir.
Copy.
Getting just about to the end of the Command 2 module. And the metal containers are Russian water containers, and the white bags are our CWC bags that we've been transferring over, filling them up out of the shuttle's fuel cell water that's produced and taking it over to Mir. I think, if I'm correct, we're about half through with that water transfer and fill operations right now.
About right.
Back out of Command 2. Into basically the cosmonauts' living quarters next as we go into the base block, the headquarters, if you will, of the Mir space station. And this little spinning is just to graphically illustrate the point that you can get lost in this space station, and you have to keep yourself oriented. And when you get to the node, stop and take a second and figure out which way you're really going. You get used to it, though, after one or two transits, and it really isn't too bad to do. Here, Juliana Franco and Chile and Shannon are discussing some of the transfer operations. Chile and Yuri are holding one of the joint documents that we use to work together. Yuri Yusuchev, in the background by the table, is doing some prep for some transfer items back from the Mir to the shuttle. From here, we're going to proceed into the Command 1 module, and at the end of that is the Soyuz, and we'll get all the way down to the end picture here, and I poked the camera in board on the Soyuz capsule, and we'll see that shortly.
Rick, it looks like you have a little pulley system to move along with.
Yeah, that's true, Dave. They've got the Russians use lots of bungees, both for hold downs and for pulling yourself along, and they're quite handy for translating. As you can see, I remarked to one of the other crew members earlier today that moving around Mir is kind of like being a spelunker exploring caves. There's a lot of long, narrow passageways for transit. Here are the Russian suits inside the Soyuz, and not only all three, of course, are Russian equipment, but Shannon's suit is in there. It was checked out yesterday, and she's fully and officially a member of the Mir 21 crew now. Quick turnaround out of Soyuz and Russian back. At this point, I was beginning to worry about the battery on my compact portable light, so I kind of speeded the rate up a little bit here.
We certainly hope not to use those Soyuz modules, but it's nice to know they're there should it become necessary.
But this, we just went by one of the little living spaces. Both Yuris have their own individual compartment for sleep, and it's a very nice opportunity for them to have some privacy during the course of their long stays on board Mir. Yeah, we're approaching the node here shortly, and then we'll be taking the pathway back to the space shuttle. There we go. We found the right one, and we're on the way. Here we're just about ready to enter the docking module. And if you notice in the lower center part of the field of view, you see a target similar to the, well, it is the exact docking target that Chile used to dock yesterday. And we'll play ODS centerline camera here for just a minute and do our own little docking maneuver.
Copy that, Rick, and we have to use that thing quite a few more times, so let's be careful with it.
You bet. Notice didn't even touch it. We just took the video camera down to it. Back into the shuttle ODS, where Chile is doing some work. And from here, we're going to take a turn aft to the space hab, as Ron is taking some transfer items out of the space hab tunnel into the Mir.
And I guess I'd like to begin by saying this is kind of a bittersweet moment for us, and one also filled with a lot of satisfaction. We've had a wonderful time on the Mir Atlantis complex here, and it started off just fantastic with the warmest welcome anyone can imagine from Yuri Adin and Yuri Devach. and it just has gone uphill from there with a great working relationship between the two crews, and certainly the sense of satisfaction that we feel for having got the job done is tremendous. And Ron Sega, who is my payload commander, has been sweating the transfer both to and from Mir from the shuttle perspective. And Yuri and Yuri have been working real hard on the Mir side, and it's been a great team effort, and I think we're there. That's the satisfaction part. Truly the sad part will be to bid farewell to Shannon and Yuri and Yuri. This is a tremendous team. We're going to miss them. We know we'll see Shannon again when she comes back on STS-79, but there's a big ocean between Russia and America, and we're not all so confident or certain, I should say, that we'll ever see our two friends Yuri and Yuri again. In person. And with that, Houston, we'll bid the formal farewell. And I'd like to extend my thanks to SOUP in Moscow for their great support, and to all the teams at the MCC. Europe?
Я знаю, что Кевин сказал очень хорошие слова. Это действительно была очень напряженная работа. Приходилось работать не 5 дней, 5 суток, но, тем не менее, режим соблюдался. Все грузы, которые необходимо было, были перенесены. Остались несколько кабелей, но это по сравнению со всей совместной программой, это, естественно, мелочи. Легко было работать, как говорил один наш общий знакомый, с такой командой, как STS-76. Пролетели очень быстро эти 5 дней. Сейчас просто не верится, что буквально сегодня, вот через несколько минут мы улетим в этом направлении. Вперед дальше экипаж STS-76 повернет по модулю Т, пройдет через СО. Дальше мы попрощаемся, закроем дверь, и Юрий закроет дверь, которая здесь называется люком. Мы будем наблюдать друг за другом дальше только через иллюминатор. Они будут смотреть на нас, мы на них. А завтра будет расстыковка. Ну, естественно, грустно расставаться с такой хорошей командой. Я хочу сказать большое спасибо. Мы очень хорошо поработали. Всем большое спасибо, ребята. Я думаю, Юра добавит свои пожелания.
Atlantis, Houston, no action on the Spec 88 evaporator feed line message. EV1, Houston.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, Linda, and we see that cable cutter at the end of the tether doing some motion also. We suggest that you take the tether that's on your wrist, the wrist end, and move that to your mini workstation, particularly before you start translating down the sills. And Rich, it just looks spectacular out there doing a spacewalk on the Atlantis Mir Space Complex. Absolutely beautiful.
Thanks, Dave. We're having a good time.
It's pretty neat out here. sit by the meat clips.
Okay. Okay, that looks great. Looks great.
That left wrist Tony Rich, it's ready for on.
I'll watch it.
Right there, see? Okay.
Yeah, the left tether is moving along here, Rich, on your left wrist.
Включаем 8 вечера. Синхронизация была.
Юра,
Да.
похоже, вы не отключили ретрансляцию КВ-2. Отключите пока, пожалуйста.
Сейчас, секундочку. Какая команда? Напомните, пожалуйста, Викторович.
Ретрансляцию КВ-2.
Юра, посмотри.
Вот запиши, пожалуйста, еще вот себе такое вот наше, на всякий случай, указание, потому что, чтобы, в общем-то, вы уточнили у своих коллег и потом кое-что сделали. Готов?
Да, готовы.
Значит, у нас в 15:43 средствами шаттла будет разворот. Должен пойти разворот.
Сейчас пока кабель затянем. Дальше, пусть пока пройдет. Вот пока мы тут монтируем, вот по инкубатору это была информация. Принимаете нас, слышите?
Да, слышим.
Ну вот живая работа.
Видим хорошо.
Все-таки кронштейн-то русский, наш. И вам его не снимать, вот Виктор Ильич говорит.
Да.
Hey, but don't go that down.
Now we're inside the space hab. That's the gyrodyne that we're returning to Earth that was on board Mir. It's all stowed and buttoned down, ready for re-entry. And as we come aboard the space hab, I'm going to cut to some live TV of Ron, who's working in there, and he's going to take over the narrative describing some of his biorack operations. So we can take downlink to payload 1 now.
Hello, Linda and I are in the space hab, which you probably saw from the view that's past the docking module in the aft part of the payload bay of the shuttle, connected by a tunnel. And we have two main activities in the space hab. One is the transfer of equipment, and we have it stored in bags such as this, and we remove it and take it to Mir. And we also return items from Russia, in this case from the Russian space station. In this case it's empty food containers. So the number of items that we have include food, clothing, water, and science equipment for Shannon to enable her to do the long-duration studies that will take place over the next roughly 140 days. This is going to be important for us in working toward the International Space Station to get more experience of long-duration flight and work, as well as technology development of our equipment that we will eventually fly on the space station, as well as beginning to increase our database in the long-duration studies of science. Now, we have one example of that here in the space hab. It's called BioRack. It's behind Linda and I, and it has flown 3 times before. It's a mini biology laboratory built by the European Space Agency. It's flown 3 times on the shuttle, STS mission 61A, the International Microgravity Laboratory 1 and 2, and now, of course, on our flight.
Yes, sir, that's affirmative. Also, there is one little delta to your message. The actual NBC show is called Nightside versus News Channel.
Okay, thanks.
We copy, Chile.
Houston, Atlantis, we've completed docking ring extension. The ring initial position light came on with pedal position base at 69, 72, and 69.
And thanks, Rich. Those numbers all look good to us, and we think that 72 really reflects a bias, and it also is actually at 69%.
Okay, that's what we heard pre-flight. Thanks a lot.
Houston, Atlantis, com check from the middeck on air to ground 2.
Atlantis, Houston, loud and clear on air to ground 2.
Physical separation.
Copy, physical separation.
Executing separation.
Concur. We have a spectacular view of the Mir space station over the South Pacific.
soon to reach 2.5 times the speed of sound, at which point pilot Rick Surfoss will fire up auxiliary power unit number 3.